If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
People who explore abandoned places, cabins, churches, haunted forests, etc. What is the scariest paranormal being or creepy thing you've seen so far?
I was urban exploring with friends, so we went into old abandoned houses. No biggie, it was fun, good vibes, etc. But we entered a specific house with an E letter painted on it. I was looking around, and when I went to the living room, I suddenly felt oppressed. Like something pressing on my chest. I felt observed and unwanted in the room. I told my friends I wanted to go out, and that's what I did. My friends didn't feel anything in particular. I went to see a friend of mine, she's sensitive to energies, etc., just like me. I just told her, hey, do you want to go visit these old abandoned houses? Without any details. I wanted to see if she felt it too. We visited the houses, no issues. Then, the E house is the only one left. We enter the house and walk around. We're talking, laughing. And when we step into the living room, we stop at the same time. Suddenly, it felt as though we had struck a wall. She instantly looked at me, uneasy, and told me, we need to get out. She had felt the same oppression, the feeling of being unwanted or observed. Always trust your instincts. If there's a negative vibe, leave. An abandoned elementary school that was shut down for a remodel after black mold was found throughout the campus. I was a teenager, and some of us decided to smoke some cannabis and walk through it. It was not abandoned. We kept hearing odd footsteps and whispers and at first decided I was just high as a kite. Until a few of us brought it up, we came to the consensus that we were all hearing the same sounds. There were people who had broken in and were living in the classrooms. They were watching us from classroom windows as we walked through the halls. When I was at university, there was an old, abandoned mental hospital on a hill. It had been featured in a few scariest places in the US TV shows. My freshman year, our resident assistant took us all on a walking tour around the outside of the asylum. It wasn't just that it looked scary, which it did, the entire atmosphere made me feel unwelcome. When I got back to my dorm, the next day I woke to find my alarm clock had not gone off for class. I looked around my room and found all of my clocks showed different times, off by a few hours, the VCR, microwave, wall clock, and my watch. Anyhow, the university ended up buying the property and uses it today. I have no idea if the people there have creepy experiences. I was house hunting in Connecticut 14 years ago. The real estate agent and I had gone to view an empty house in Guilford. I don't remember how long it had been empty, but it must have been a while, as everything was quite dusty. Despite its age, the house had undergone modernization at some point, likely in the 90s based on the light fixtures and other details. I really liked the house itself, but there were a few outdoor features that were deal breakers for me. I stayed on the main floor while the agent went to the basement to check the mechanicals, his first time there. I was walking from the dining room into the great room when I was attacked by something. It suddenly felt like I was hit in the middle of my chest and settled in my throat so that I had difficulty breathing. It was as though they were choking me. I knew I had to get out of there at once, so I ran to the basement door, told the agent I would be waiting outside, and then got the hell out of there. I stood by the car, panting for the 2 to 3 minutes it took for the pressure in my chest to ease up. Since then, I've often wondered if the people who eventually bought the house dealt with the entity. It did take another 6 months for the house to sell even though the market was tight. I'm sharing this for my grandfather. He's almost 76 years old. This happened when he and his siblings were teens. They grew up really poor on a road in a really small town in Alabama. They didn't have much and couldn't afford to do the few things the town had to offer. There still aren't many things to do around here, but that's not why I'm sharing this story. One night, while their parents were at work, my one of his brothers, and both his sisters went to an abandoned field nearby. I think the small farm had been foreclosed on. Honestly, I think both sisters went because they didn't want their brothers getting hurt doing something stupid. It wasn't like they could afford the hospital bills if they ended up needing to go. Anyway, they make their way to the field. It had been created next to a hill, and they had to make their way over it to get to the field. This detail becomes relevant later in the story. They begin to speculate why the farm may have been left. The vegetation was practically at waist length. They were glad to have something to do for once. Suddenly, my older brother, the tallest out of the four, claimed to see something on the other side of the field. Over there. Looks like an all-white fox, he said. Papa thought his brother was confused at first. While there are definitely foxes around here, there haven't been many sightings of them. Especially all the white ones. Then everyone saw it. It was standing at the edge of the woods at the side of the field opposite them. It was definitely an all-white fox. There was something really off about it, though, outside of its fur. Though it was a few feet away, they could tell it was a lot bigger than a regular fox. Pawpaw swears it was staring them down. To do what exactly? He's still not sure. Simultaneously, they all started to run back towards home. They heard the fox running after them. Pawpaw glanced back at the fox. It had gotten a lot closer in the short amount of time between starting to run and looking back. As Pawpaw looked back, it did something completely unexpected. It stood on its hind legs and started running like a human. At that point, he yelled at his siblings to run faster and took a hand of one of his sisters. They got back to their home in less than half the time it took to get to the field. They proceeded to lock all the doors and windows before exposing what happened to the two brothers who didn't go. No more than an hour later, both parents got home from work. They could only afford one car, so they always came home together. My pawpaw also attempted to explain what had happened to them, but their father swiftly dismissed it. According to Dad, there was no fox outside or any evidence of there ever being one. My siblings and I questioned those who were present. They all confirmed it was happening but refused to talk about it further than that. You could tell by the looks on their faces and their tone of voice that they were genuinely scared. Pawpaw said they never went back to that field and prayed every day to never see the creature again. There's a house on that field now, but we don't know if the owners ever saw the thing. Back in the late 80s, I was around 9. There was an old abandoned church near where I lived. It had been boarded up for about 20 years, steel doors and windows all over it so you couldn't get in, and out at the back of the church there was a small, really old graveyard with around 30 headstones that had fallen over or crumbled away with age that we would mess about in as kids. Playing football, hide and seek, and the usual kid stuff. Terrible doing that now, thinking back. Anyway, one day, when going to the small graveyard with my two friends, Dennis and Robert, we noticed one of the metal doors had been vandalized and bent up at the corner, leaving just enough room for a person to fit inside. As children, we were naturally curious and immediately jumped in. We got inside the old church, and it was creepy as duck, paint and brickwork falling off the walls, the floorboards all warped, bent, and some missing, the church benches rotten and broken. Some of the old stained glass windows had fallen in and smashed on the floor with the frames rotting away, but what I remember most is the altar. It was higher up, maybe about 3 feet, with steps leading up. Either side of the floor we were standing on either side of the altar, there were 2 massive piles of pigeon shit. I swear it was like a pyramid of shit where the birds had got in through a hole in the roof and sat in the rafters nesting and probably just shitting on the same spot for 20 years, and a ducking stank of ammonia. We couldn't handle the smell and how creepy the place was, so we ducked off out the gap in the door fast. Anyway, that night my mate Robert must have told his older brother Michael, who was around 16, that we got inside the church through the hole in the door. His brother told Robert that he and his mates were going to go up the next night and do a seance as one of his mates. Scott had a Ouija board. Robert told me and Dennis this story the next day and asked if we wanted to go and do it with them. I and Dennis said, duck that both at the same time, but we'd hang about the wee graveyard at the back and see if anything happened. So later that night, probably around 7:30, we were at the graveyard and saw Robert's big brother, his pal Scott, with something under his arm and another 3 guys coming through the church gates. Scott shouted over to Robert, "Where the duck's the bit you get in." And Robert pointed over to the metal door with the bend in it. The 5 of them all squeezed through and got inside while we kicked a ball about outside in the graveyard. They were inside the church for about 30 minutes, and I said to Dennis, "Have a look inside and see what they're doing." Dennis popped his head through the gap in the meter door and said he couldn't see them as they must have been up at the altar, and from where the doorway was, you couldn't see right up there, but he said he could hear them all chanting some weird shit. We were freaked out a bit and just carried on playing football. Another 30 minutes later, we heard all the 5 guys in the church screaming, then a loud thud, then them all running, scrambling, and panicking to get out, then a hole in the door. We ran toward the front of the church fence but stopped to make sure they all got out. Scott emerged first, followed by the other 3 boys, and Robert's older brother emerged last, covered in pigeon shit. We all just ran as fast as we could back down to the street we all lived on. Once we stopped running, we looked at all the older boys. They were all white with fear, eyes glazed as if they'd seen a ghost and were about to cry. Robert's brother sat on a wall with his head in his hands. I asked, "What the duck happened in there? And what happened to Michael?" Robert's older brother, Scott, said they were sitting near the altar doing the Ouija board, and for 30 minutes nothing happened.
Then he said the planchette on the Ouija board moved to spell out 3 letters, O, U, and T. Then Michael levitated in the air and got thrown backwards through the big pile of shit and smashed his back against the wall. And then they all scrambled to the door to get out, and every one of them witnessed and confirmed it was true.
I recall Michael removing his shit-stained jumper, tossing it into a bush, and cautioning Robert not to disclose the incident to their parents, all the while wiping tears from his eyes. He also warned his mates not to disclose the incident to anyone, or else he would beat them up, to which they all agreed. It's fair to say none of us got any sleep that night. The secret about what happened lasted about a week, then everyone was calling Robert's brother Shitty, Pigeon, or Birdie, and he used to get really ducking pissed off lol. All in all it was funny in the end but not at the time. Like I say, me and my two mates never saw a thing, but the reaction and the story the older boys told were definitely convincing to me. I'm just glad it didn't happen to me. My name is Donald. 2 summers ago my best friend, we'll call him Randy, and his girlfriend, Clarissa, moved into their first apartment. They were rooming with 2 other girls at the time, and one was a semi-practicing pagan. Curious about her paganism, we asked if she could show us a ritual. After a long rundown of all the rules, how we should behave, and the steps of the process, she agreed to walk to a nearby park with us during the spring equinox and let us be involved in a ritual, I can't remember what it's called, where you basically offer certain indulgences, liquor, tobacco, etc., to gods or spirits and keep a positive thought in your mind. I still have a very poor understanding of how the pagan belief system works, so I apologize for the vague descriptions. Plus, I wasn't really listening, which comes into play. Anyway, during the ritual, Randy and I decided to be jackasses and think negative, dark thoughts because we didn't believe in it, and we believed it would be funny. After the 4 of us sat in silence for a while, we each poured some alcohol into the ground and twisted some tobacco out of a cigarette. We hung out for a while. We started hearing a rustling in the woods near us that sounded like an animal. We were a little spooked just because it was midnight during a solstice and we'd been joking around about spirits, but we didn't really think much more of it until we got closer. The way the branches were moving looked like a person was walking through them. Except there wasn't. There was nothing. No animals. No birds. No wind. Just a single patch of the bushes moving around for no reason. The pagan girl got really serious and said we have to leave the park and not turn around or look back. I remember her saying, "It's probably nothing. But if it is something, there's a good chance it's predatory. Don't run, or it will chase you. Don't look back, or it will chase you. Just walk and look forward until we leave the park." We followed her instructions, got back to the apartment, and drank a little bit. We were having a good time and didn't think much of what happened. We were just silly college-aged kids getting scared in the woods. It happens. The next morning my best friend was complaining that he could smell rotten eggs outside of his bedroom window all night. I half-jokingly said, "You know, sulfur smells like rotten eggs. Maybe we did piss something off." Later that night, I got a text from the pagan girl saying that the living room blind that covered the window of the door suddenly snapped off and fell to the ground for no reason. She was getting paranoid and asked what I prayed for during the ritual. I lied and told her I prayed for strength, not wanting to admit that Randy and I thought about nothing but demons and death and murder. She said she'd just shrug it off as a coincidence. Randy and I, both being raised on the X-Files and horror movies, began to get curious. We went back to the woods. This time we brought a third friend, Chris. Chris claimed to have some psychic abilities or something, but he's the kind of person who claimed a lot of things that were complete bullshit. Still, if he was at all legit, he may be useful. He told us he could pinpoint the exact spot we performed the ritual, and we asked him to show us. He led us to the exact spot. The exact spot in a big open field of grass. It was a little weird, but whatever. The ground we did it was slightly elevated from the rest. Maybe he was just thinking like us, as it was the reason we decided to do it there in the first place. He got really serious and told us we pissed something off and that we should probably leave and not come around at night when no one else is there anymore. We disregarded his advice and led him directly into the woods. As we got deeper and deeper into the woods, I started to get sick. It started off as just some nausea, which I usually get when I'm a little dehydrated. The farther we went, the sicker I got. We were about a quarter mile deep into the woods when I had to stop by a tree to rest. I was resting when Chris made us all be quiet because he could hear something. Once we were quiet, we could all hear it. Someone was saying something over and over again, and it sounded like it was very slowly getting closer. It was a 2-syllable word. We all listened closely until we all realized what it meant, and typing it gives me chills. What we heard was Donald, Donald. My friends instantly looked at me, and I looked back at them, and we all immediately decided, without saying a word to each other, to sprint out of there. Halfway through the run, we all heard a loud, booming yet raspy voice, in what I can only describe as sounding like someone screaming and whispering at the same time, say Donald. We ran to the apartment and got drunk without talking and just shook nervously for what felt like hours before we decided to hold off on going back for a while. We didn't hold off on going back. This was the most climactic part of the story. Eventually, we came clean with the pagan girl, and she decided to do a cleansing ritual in the apartment. Upon its completion, the whole place smelled like sulfur for a while. She performed it alone in the park that same night. Nothing has happened since then. Creepy abandoned farmhouse. I have a few stories about this place. The first time I went into this house was around 5 to 6 years ago, towards the end of my time in high school with my younger brother. We were walking through a field not far from where we used to live when we saw the house. It had obviously been abandoned for quite a while, and we decided to go check it out. We explored the ground floor, finding only a few golf clubs, a stench-filled deep freezer, and various other items. Eventually we decided to go upstairs and see the rest of the place. I proceeded first and had ascended approximately 3 steps when I heard loud bangs that resembled someone striking the wall beside me with a hammer. We quickly made our way to the door, as I feared the property owner had noticed our entry and was about to confront us. But nope, no one was there. We sprinted out and hid in the field to catch our breath before we went home. There was only one other time I heard noises there. I went back with my brother and a former friend. After the first time, my brother decided to stay outside and keep watch for anything while we went inside. We were standing in the first room inside the door, doing the typical, "Is anyone here with us?" When outside, I heard my brother yell, "Hey." Right after that, we heard something hit the floor upstairs. We ran the hell out of there so fast, but it wouldn't be the last time we went there. We would still go back to the house every so often, usually with new friends who wanted to check it out for themselves. We eventually made it around the whole house, making our way into the attic and the basement, which is where the next part takes place. It was a dark and snowy day, ideal for an urbex session for 3 20-year-olds. I was with my best friend and another guy we were close with at the time. We made our way to the basement, which had a dirt floor that was covered in deer tracks. My best friend and I were perplexed, wondering how in the world a deer found its way in there. Our other friend spoke up and said, "Well, you know the devil does walk on goat's feet." It sounds so silly, but that really freaked us out. This friend did have a dark side to him, and the way he said it so calmly and matter-of-factly chilled us more than the air outside. I went back a few times after that, but I haven't been back since the last time when I saw evidence that some people had been squatting there. Sometimes I'll take a back road home and slow down and take a look at it from a safe distance. I visited an abandoned manor and heard voices. Some years back I was to go on a camping trip to the woods with a friend and my partner. Since I like to take photos, my friend suggested we visit a big abandoned manor he knew of in the area we were to set up camp. The place is very desolate, with only one small residential house in sight, situated maybe a kilometer from the manor, only visible due to the flat landscape. Due to all the broken glass inside the manor, our friend was walking around outside with his dog while I and my boyfriend explored inside. We walked up some stairs and entered a room where I got an eerie feeling, and for some reason I felt it had something to do with children. I just told my partner I didn't like how that room made me feel, so I would go downstairs again. He continued to explore upstairs further and then came to join me downstairs, and that is when we heard it, like a gust of echoes passing right past us of children's laughter. Being the only person in the company with a tendency for superstition, I asked my partner, "Did you also hear that?" And he said, "That was children." We shouted to our friend if there was anyone but him outside, and he answered that there was a car driving around the courtyard, and for some reason this made us discard what we heard as children outside, although it felt like it passed us. Fast forward to later that night while we were lying in the woods ready to sleep, I suddenly realized something. I poked my partner and said, "We talked to those people in the car, there were no children with them." It was a young woman practicing for her driver's license with her teacher in a place with no traffic, there was no one else in sight. My partner, who is not superstitious, said about this place, "I will never go back there unless it is to burn the place down," the latter being a joke, of course. Ironically, the place burned down, even the same part of the building where we had that experience. Presumed arson. I have attempted to locate additional accounts from the same location, but my search has been unsuccessful, especially for specific stories. But I have seen plenty of people mentioning it as an extremely unpleasant and haunted location. Abandoned house. When I was about 5 or 6 years old, I was at my cousin's house somewhere in Indiana for 3 days, she's 3 weeks older than me. The second day I was there, I and my cousin decided to go check out this abandoned house that her dad said was haunted between 3 and 5 in the afternoon. After running around for a bit and engaging in activities typical of a 6-year-old, we sat by a bush in front of the house. I remember the house being gray, having a white door, and being able to see the furniture inside through the window. The house was about 15 feet wide and 20 feet long and sat on the corner of an intersection. After talking to my cousin for a few minutes, we both look up at the same time, seeing a pitch-black figure about 5 feet away walking down the sidewalk towards the side of the house. It passed the corner of the house out of sight, and we, being curious kids, looked around the corner of the house to see it again, but nothing was there. Remember, the house is 20 feet or longer, so nothing could move that fast to run to the back. Freaked out, we run to her house to tell our parents what we saw. Since we were kids, our parents thought we were making it up and saying random things, as kids often do. Every few years or so, I see a similar figure in random places, mainly during the day, but it is usually further away. Now that I'm 16 years old, it doesn't scare me as much, but I still occasionally think about it. My cousin told me she doesn't remember it at all, and I think she does because things that have to do with ghosts, spirits, etc., freak her out. I'm curious to know if anyone has seen anything similar to what I've seen. I think something chased me. It was summer, I think it was late June. I decided to go for a bike ride. I chose a road where people rarely drive through, even in the daytime. You can tell it's rarely used because of the clean asphalt and road markings. It looked like someone just put it there yesterday even though it was poured there 6 years ago. The sidewalk was getting overgrown by weeds. The road was 4 lanes wide, did not have streetlights. Yes, it did not have streetlights, and trees were covering the road, really big trees. They were very old. There were a few houses, but they appeared to be abandoned, as I had never seen anyone in the area. The road started with a gentle incline and then gradually became steeper. There is also an abandoned factory nearby. I do not like to talk about that place. I chose this place because I love the feel of smooth asphalt. I rode a road bike 28C. I think it was 10:40 p.m. or 11 p.m. I passed the entrance of the road, which is the abandoned factory. I do not like the factory, so I changed my RPM to get out of that place and get to the sweet, smooth asphalt. 200 meters in, the road was empty. I knew I was the only one in that area, but I had a gut feeling I was not. I just ignored it because I'm ignorant, ha. I used my phone attached to my drop bars as a light. The place was chilly at 16 degrees Celsius, it's foggy, but only a little. I reached the end of the road, which no longer had the nice asphalt on it. Just a few meters away there is a park, a terrible park that wasn't maintained properly and the grass is ugly. I came to my senses that it was going to be almost 3 a.m. The place was known for crimes in the town, murders, muggers, drugs, angry drunk dudes, and a sack of a mutilated, nearly decomposing man thrown in the bushes. As a perfectly normal human being, I realized it was time to leave and went home. I clipped my cleats in the pedals and used the momentum of downhill to get out of there as soon as possible. I was on my way out of that place, 24 kilometers per hour on my speedometer. As I was going down, I caught a glimpse of a figure using my phone light. The range was bad, but I am sure I saw something. I started pedaling really fast. I became Mark Cavendish that night, but I did not want to go really quickly as there was a sharp left turn. The wind was blowing into my ears, and I started to hear really heavy footsteps coming from my back, something like dum, dum, dum. I was ducking terrified, I was panicking. I had nothing else in my mind except to get out of that place fast. After the sharp left turn, there was a hill. I knew I would lose my momentum. I shifted to 5th gear on my bike, 105/10 SPD, and pedaled until I got out of the entrance. There was light after the entrance, and I felt nothing was chasing me anymore. I managed to get out of the place. My home was 10 kilometers away. I was exhausted and disoriented. I was thinking about what I saw. Luckily, I didn't feel alone anymore because there were cars passing by. To this day I still think of what I saw. Did I really see something and something chase me, or did I think I saw something, and my brain made me hear things in confusion? Scary abandoned house. No one knew where it came from. We all went to sleep the night before, and it was there the next morning. Not even the owners of the houses on both sides had a clue how it got there. Neither homeowner ever heard as much as the hiss of air brakes during the whole of that night. The only real indication of how it had arrived was the trailer it was sitting upon. At the time, I was only around 13 years old, but the topic was highly discussed in the neighborhood, and everyone I spoke to, regardless of age, was eager to discuss it. Our neighborhood was new and off by itself, and it wasn't out of the ordinary for folks to dump things out there. Dogs and cats were the most common, but 1 or 2 cars would turn up every year. A house, though, no one had ever seen that. No one had ever seen it before, let alone expected it. The days passed, but no information could be gotten from anywhere. Soon, It began to take on a spooky and haunted reputation. Along with its phantom-like arrival in the dark of night, it did look a little similar to that house from Psycho. The stories first reached me while I was talking to a friend's younger brother. Among the grade school kids, the house was becoming a very real symbol of fear, although it was just an old, empty house for me. This fear didn't prevent some of the more adventurous kids from entering and exploring it. I witnessed a particularly funny episode just by chance. While loafing aimlessly around the streets, I was passing by in time to see a preteen boy running from the house in terror, claiming something had grabbed him. Whether his imagination had got the best of him or an older kid was having a bit of fun, the horror put upon this abandoned house had fully taken root in the neighborhood. While all this was going on, a real boogeyman had been forgotten about. I won't put his actual name here, not because of his privacy, but that of his victims. We'll call him Rudy. Rudy had grown up in the neighborhood and, until he was arrested, was well liked, but a lot of the parents had voiced their fears early on because of his habit of hanging around younger boys. When he was released from jail, he was allowed to move in with his folks. Anyone who wasn't aware of his proclivities beforehand knew now. Every parent in the neighborhood watched him closely, but when the ghost house popped up, people's focus shifted. A few of us teenagers were riding our bikes around the neighborhood. The father of a boy we'll call Bill was looking for his son. I overheard him speaking to a young kid close by, asking if he'd seen him. Nonchalantly, the boy said that he had seen Bill going into the ghost house with Rudy just a few minutes prior. This got my full attention. The shock on the father's face is still crystal clear in my mind. I turned around and watched the father run full speed into the house. Most of us there stood transfixed as we saw Bill's dad disappear inside. Things were quiet for about the first 30 seconds, then all of a sudden, a loud ruckus broke out, followed by Rudy flying out the doorway and onto the ground below. Bill's dad was close behind. He leapt upon Rudy, throwing fists as he landed. Bill came out a few seconds later, crying for his dad to stop. His dad ignored him, standing up and kicking Rudy on the ground over and over. Rudy eventually got to his feet and ran for home. Bill and his dad were right behind him. I continued to watch until they disappeared from my sight. Bill and Rudy would both claim later on that nothing had happened between them. Either way, Bill's dad had the support of most of the community, and Rudy declined to press charges on him. Rudy would eventually move away and out of the minds of most of us, until he was arrested 3 years later for abducting and ending 2 boys near his new home. Only then did we realize how lucky Bill had been. That night, as I fell asleep, I remember wondering what was going to happen to Rudy and Bill's dad. When I woke up, things were normal for a summer morning. Around 9, I was making a bowl of cereal when I got a phone call. It was a friend of mine. He was short of breath and excited. "The ghost house is gone, man." I hung up and hopped on my bike. When I arrived at the end of the street, I looked down and saw the empty lot as it used to be. I rode down to it, and a small group was gathered, talking to the neighbors. It was much the same as the morning when it appeared. They hadn't heard or seen anything strange. It seemed to leave just as silently as it had arrived. To this day, I haven't met a soul who knows anything about that house. Sometimes, I think I dreamt the whole thing up, but then I speak to an old friend from the neighborhood, and my memories are confirmed. Of course, I don't believe it was haunted or anything like that, but I know for sure something was wrong about it, and I pray I never see it again. Brother went rural exploring in an abandoned building on my property. Found some really old skis, brought them back down to my garage, and I've been having telltale signs of a spirit since. To exacerbate the situation, my nearly 200-year-old house was the scene of a murder-suicide in the late 1800s, 1860s, I believe. Upon our initial move in 4 years ago, we noticed a strange phenomenon. No matter how skillfully we affixed artwork to the walls in that room, it consistently fell or appeared to be knocked down during the night. This was pretty constant for the first year, but after a while this stopped, and the house went back to feeling like an old house, not an old haunted house. Well, my brother seemed to have pissed someone/thing off during his visit last weekend, because now it's a literal spookfest. Being in the woods/mountains of NH, there's a lot of weird stuff in the woods. On my 5-acre plot, I have 2 abandoned buildings and what appears to be an early prototype of the magic carpet, a feature familiar to all ski resort patrons. That's where he found the skis, but while exploring the house, he also found all the rooms/doors to be open/unlocked except for one. The one door that was closed was not simply closed, it was closed, the door frame covered with multiple layers of plywood/2x4s, as well as more padlocks and deadbolts than he'd ever seen on one door. After talking to a realtor friend who pulled tax map information, though there is a power pole on my property going to this house, the power seemed disconnected, According to public records, the last person said to have lived there has no death certificate on file, and that was about 50 to 60 years ago. Our minds raced after hearing this news because we remembered the overly boarded up door in that abandoned house and thought, what if she's still in there? The past few nights there have been all kinds of odd sounds in the night. We've both heard murmuring, felt odd feelings walking around at night, things just feeling off, and the worst was around 3 a.m. 2 nights ago, when I was woken up by not a tapping but a whacking noise that sounded like wood being hit on wood. It was loud enough that I felt the noise was coming from either inside my bedroom or just outside it. After a thorough 3:30 a.m. investigation, I not only found nothing out of place but also found nothing in my house that came close to replicating this sound. It was loud and came in like whack, whack, then a pause, then again, then a pause, and then one last time. This was aggressive. My fiancé and I had come to terms with the original spirits in the house, and I believe they've come to terms with us, but this stuff recently is on another level. The next day I continued hunting for a viable source of the sound and found nothing in the house. I had some wooden dowels in my car. I brought one in the house, and sure enough, it was almost a dead match for the noise. I then looked in the other bay of the garage to see that the ski poles my brother grabbed are wooden. I'm not scared yet, but I definitely feel as though my brother may have welcomed a poltergeist into my house. I don't believe in the paranormal, however. What happened to me wasn't a large thing at all, but it almost made me question my beliefs. Washington State is a creepy place, and one of my favorite things about the state is all of the small towns scattered around. You drive through these towns, and people will turn to stare at you until you're out of sight. Even though I live here, I feel like an outsider in all of the coastal towns, and I don't hate it. I don't live in the place where this happened, so I feel like I should say exactly where this happened, just for context. The Long Beach Peninsula has many ghost stories and also had one of the oldest towns in Washington State. Oysterville, an unincorporated village, brims with so much history that it seems to spill over into the small town. I was there on a trip with a few family members, and the second we entered the town, I started to feel strange. I couldn't really tell why, as I get strange feelings a lot. I never even considered that they could be paranormal. We visited a small church that was always open, except for at night. We also visited a schoolhouse and an old abandoned cabin, all of which you should easily be able to find by driving around the town for a short amount of time. The church was unfortunately, or fortunately, the only place we were able to actually enter. The church was old and white with a red roof. The interior was made entirely of brown wood, which still emitted a faint earthy smell. The altar stage floor and the small side rooms creaked when you walked on them. The secondary room was located off to the side of the altar, was connected to the small square entryway, which also had a door leading to the altar. One member of my family seriously believes in ghosts to the point of saging their house every few months, or more often. To try to trick them, likely with the intent of teasing them after the fact, I went around to the front entrance area and pushed open a door. With the entire church tilted on a hill, I turned the knob, and the door swung open. I ran around to see this person freaking out, and what happened next happened fast. The door swung back closed, going in the opposite direction from the way the church was tilted. I stopped laughing for a few seconds, and because it was nothing crazy, ultimately decided to ignore it. Later that night, I and another family member started to make jokes about the bad energy our extremely superstitious family member was talking about. I had gone back into the church alone before we left and had said, "If anything is here, please follow me." Many people would advise me not to do this. I guess you could say that I wanted to be convinced that ghosts were real. Walking down to the beach at night, I saw a figure on top of the grassy and sandy hills that lead to the beach. It was a head with shoulders. I have had shadows like that described as darker than the dark. I can second that. It disappeared just as I saw it. We walked back after looking at the stars, and nothing much happened. There isn't much detail in this story, and it isn't all that scary, but it made me question what I believe, and just the thought of going back to that church gives me a bad feeling, even though I plan to. Abandoned tunnel. I'm not generally someone who believes in the paranormal, but I definitely experienced something weird going to the Eaton Tunnel in Wood County, West Virginia, with my friends. It was late, and people had had a few drinks and smoked, so we were all like, what the heck? Let's go to a supposedly haunted tunnel in the middle of the night. Upon getting there, it was all fun and games. We had to park and then walk down this road to finally get to the tunnel. Once we got in, I truly realized how dark it was. Completely black. Even with a flashlight, you could only see so far. Well, about halfway through, I just got this feeling. I can't explain it. My hair on my body stood up. My heart was racing. I don't know how to explain it, but it felt like something evil was about to happen. I stopped walking and noticed that some of my friends had also stopped. I turned on my flashlight to look. We started walking in the dark to enhance the experience, and a few of my friends were frozen in place. One had even started silently crying. Finally, one of my friends was like, "We need to leave," and we all booked it out. I don't know exactly what happened, but we all felt a simultaneous sense of danger. The car ride home was pretty silent until we eventually started joking about it, most likely to hide our fear. I've never felt that way before since that day. I've even questioned if maybe there was, like, a group of people waiting to hurt us and our senses just started going haywire. Like I said, I'm skeptical of the paranormal, but I know what I felt that night in the Eaton Tunnel. Place is evil. Exploring in Ireland, possible paranormal. I and 2 other people went to the old convent near us. There are 3 ways to get to the building and around 7 access points. We went in by going in a broken window. When we went in, we almost forgot that we had broken the stairs the last time we were here with a few more people. It was by accident as someone went down them too fast on the dodgy side. While looking around upstairs in what we presumed was a bathroom, we heard a small bang. It was like someone throwing a small rock against some wood. We shrugged it off, and after 5 minutes, we heard it again. We were confused as it was the middle of the day and no one went near it at that time. Being slightly uneasy, we walked out into a field behind the place, and then Gary, not his real name, but I'm using it as his name, heard a sort of muffled laugh. I hadn't heard this, but he wasn't a bullshitter, so we went behind a bush and waited for a minute or 2, then headed to the main road about 3/4 of a mile away. This happened during the summer, and we plan to return in the spring during the Easter break. Abandoned places are no joke. When I was in high school, my friends and I got really into exploring abandoned places. We used to research places along the East Coast and drive during the summertime to check them out and take cool pictures. One time, a kid from my buddy's class told us about an abandoned mental asylum in Maryland, which was particularly interesting because, unlike most places, it was a 5-building complex with a large center building that was 3 stories tall. I forgot the name, but if anyone knows what I'm talking about, feel free to share. Naturally, this piqued our interest, so that weekend we told our parents we were going on a fishing trip to Maryland, and 6 of us road trip to see this place. We began by inspecting the smaller building in the complex and gradually moved around the area to look for security. To give a sort of layout to the asylum, all of the buildings were connected to each other aside from the main building and the church that was behind it. So as we entered the first building, we decided to pull a Scooby-Doo and split up to cover more ground. I got paired with a kid in the group that didn't really want to be there to begin with, and we went down to the basement of the building. As we went down, I noticed that there was a crude doorway near the staircase that was out of place from the other large hallways upstairs. I convinced the guy I was paired with to check it out on the condition that I went first. The layout of this room was like a ramp, so if you kept walking back, it would get closer to the ceiling and a lot darker. We had one flashlight, which I gave to my friend, and I was using my phone flashlight. So as I walked in, I naturally got drawn to walk straight back while my buddy went to the left side instead. I remember saying to him as we were inside, "Damn, this place smells like shit," and when I turned around, the guy I'm with speed walks towards me and says that we need to leave now. Thinking he was just scared, I didn't argue with him, and we left, and I didn't think much of it for the rest of our time there. Later that week, my friends and I are at a party, and we're telling people all about this asylum we just explored. I start telling people about the main building, and the guy I was paired up with comes by to hear what we're talking about. As I start talking about the basement and the room we were in, he interrupts me. He then tells me that the reason he made us leave so fast was because, as I mentioned the unpleasant smell, he saw that the left side of the room had furnaces and piles of old shoes and white medical patient clothes. We were in the morgue, and I had no idea. The scariest haunted place I've been to has probably got to be an abandoned quarry that is local to my region. I'm being really vague because I would rather not give the location up. I have a few stories from here. I spent a lot of time here alone during the day just exploring the property and digging fossils, which is another hobby of mine. I really loved the land and actually felt pretty connected to it. I would never stay alone when it started getting dark. Furthermore, yes, I still have the fossils I dug from here. No, I'm not willing to give them away. Last disclaimer before I continue, if you know where I'm talking about, please do not disclose this location. It's very dangerous to go there after dark. You can get seriously injured. There is an old rock crusher there, and there are some tunnels remaining underneath the crusher. Most tunnels are collapsed from what took place there. In 2015 I took my college roommate to the crusher, and we brought my dog since there are a lot of trails in the area as well. We walked the trails, checked the place out, and I told her some local stories. We decided to go into the crusher and whip out our phones to do an impromptu EVP session. We get about a minute into the recording before my dog's neck first starts to raise. He lowly starts to growl. We ask, "Can the dog see you?" In that instance, a rock was hurled at us from the back of the tunnel. My dog starts going nuts, and we all ran for our lives to get out of there. We did get that on recording, and I have it saved on my old iPhone somewhere. I may be able to debunk the second story, but I'll still include it. This took place about 2 years prior to the story above, but in a different part of the quarry. There's another part accessible by trails that brings you to a clearing where they would mine/haul the limestone into the carts that were part of the tunnel towards the crusher. My friends and I were there a little past dark, just smoking and hanging out. We thought we were alone. We started hearing voices coming from the trees. However, each time we paused our conversation to listen, the voices would cease. The voices would resume when we started talking again. We all felt really creeped out and had a terrible gut feeling, so we quickly left. The land is open to the public, and we shouldn't have been there past dark, so we could have heard other people doing what we were doing. The only reason why I haven't completely ruled out the paranormal is because the voices seemed to stop when we stopped talking and how we felt physically. Could also just be us psyching ourselves out, though, especially because we were being dumb kids. The third story is the reason why I haven't returned since. It was November 1st, 2019. I was just hanging out with some friends, and we got bored. One suggests we just go take a walk at the quarry. I and my boyfriend, now fiancé, were wary, but we obliged. We got there, and as soon as we started walking on one of the trails that led to the quarry, I had this terrible feeling in my gut. It was dread mixed with paralyzing fear. I never experienced that here before. The energy was forceful. It felt almost electric and chaotic. So we ventured further. I couldn't shake this awful gut feeling I had. It was telling me, "Leave immediately, you are not welcome here." We get past this dried up stream bed, it was dry and dusty, and we start smelling this foul, almost bog-like smell mixed with wet dog. We weren't near any water, and I knew exactly where we were on the property. My boyfriend said we should turn back because that's not a good sign spiritually, and I agreed. The wind picked up after that, and the trees started creaking. That was my last straw. I want to stop here and explain that I'm a listen to the trees kind of person. I'm not sure if it's because of me growing up in and around the woods or my personal beliefs. Did we hear the creak of those trees, a sound we hadn't heard during our entire stay? In my mind, that was the spirit warning us one last time to turn around. I am getting major goosebumps writing this, by the way, before something else happens. So we absolutely turned around. Our friends were terrified as well. We started hightailing it out of there. Getting back to the car felt like it took forever. We felt like we were being chased. Can't make that shit up. That's how urgent this feeling of leave now was. We all thankfully made it back to the car without further incident. We all had nightmares about that night. They all included a dog/wolf. That was enough for both me and my fiancée to not return. In our opinion, we believe there are not only the spirits of those who have passed, but there are also elementals on the land as well. Encounter a very close friend had at a local abandoned church. This was the first time I had visited this local locale, and as far as I know, the last time my friend ever did. It was located in south-central Alabama, about half an hour outside the city I lived in at the time. It was a small, one-room church from sometime in the 1800s. Vandals had long since broken out all the windows, as well as the front door. Walking in through where the entrance doors used to be, the pulpit was directly ahead, and a back door was on the right-hand side, as you were facing it. When it came time for the actual encounter, my friend, her boyfriend, my roommate, and I decided to go check it out. All of us were pretty fascinated by things of a paranormal nature, so a haunted church within driving distance was perfect. We had some issues finding the right road, but once we did, we pulled directly in front of the entrance so we could see inside. My friend, Anna, immediately told us that we needed to go. This was a bit odd considering she had been the one to suggest the idea in the first place. Looking back at her from where I was in the passenger seat, I could tell that she was properly terrified. This was a girl who had formerly worked as a correctional officer and joked about the stuff they had to deal with, so seeing her this afraid was more shocking than anything. Curiosity got the better of my roommate and me, though, so we got out and looked around inside, then explored the graveyard for a bit. We didn't notice anything strange, so we left. On the way home, Anna still seemed to be almost in shock, but we were able to get her to tell us what had spooked her. When we pulled up in front of the door, she said there was a figure in the back corner to the right of the pulpit. As best I can recall, she described it as a black figure with red eyes, hunched over with hands on the floor. There wasn't much detail that she would tell us, but she did mention teeth and claws. My roommate and I did come up with a theory, But I'd like to see what people here think before sharing it to prevent the power of suggestion from affecting your ideas. Haunted abandoned mental asylum. The main thing I want to know is, does anyone have any information on the Woolston Park Mental Asylum in Australia? I've spent a lot of time reading stories and forums, vibing the place out, and just being there. I feel drawn, like I can help the spirits there. I've had too many experiences and come out without a scratch, but the history is blurred, and I'm not willing to risk myself without knowing as much as I can. 1. The first experience was 6 years ago. I never heard of this place. We get there and are sitting in the courtyard area to the front of the building, which is boarded up. We're chatting and discussing its history. I look up and see a ragged girl in a white dress through the window. This is important for all the future stories. We get in there, take a bunch of photos, and mostly joke around. This was before they tore the place apart, and there are still baths, files, wheelchairs, etc. I wish I had read them then. An eyewitness said they saw it all thrown away. A shame. We're about to leave and end up at the lunatics ward. The boards here are especially hard to get off the doors. They're screwed in, unlike the rest, which were just a couple of nails, so instead of going in, we listen. Inside, we hear screams and muffled voices. Listening intently for a while, we had to move away from the door because it actually got very hot. At that point, we all got scared and ran away. 2. Not my account, but a close friend at the time. He went back with some other friends and got into the lunatics ward. They do the usual joking, looking around, etc. They part ways. My friend is in one room, and his friends, girls, are in another. He hears them scream, and they come running to him. The girls said they heard deep, loud voices and needed to get out. They hear another voice, like an angry man, and then a deep growl, which lasted the whole time they were running to the front door. It took around 30 seconds according to my friend. They all got to my friend's house safely and slept in the same bed that night, and the girls were certain this thing followed them home. I have no story about how or why they thought that apart from unease and bad dreams, I assume fear, since nothing out of the ordinary happened that night, or any other night to those girls. 3. In the ward again, with a very good friend of mine. We're discussing the rumors, about a children's graveyard where they disposed of the babies, and I get chills in certain spots of the garden. I'm certain if I were to dig deep enough, I would find bones. Anyway, we walk around and feel eerier than usual. I mention how a puddle could look like bloodstains on the stairs. We walk up them and hear footsteps to the right of the staircase, a bathroom. Significant because I now know this is the spot where I saw the girl the first time. Strange because there are no longer floorboards, even on the top floor, and if there was someone up there, we would have seen them from the ground floor. My friend is scared, and we leave. On our way out, there is blood strewn down the stairs and all the way to and out of the front door, like dragged handprints. We only made it to the top of those stairs before we got scared, and they're the only way up. We basically run to our car and check ourselves out. We're fine, except for some blood on my friend, not her own, and then we notice there is also blood on the car. Scary because of where/what you have to walk through to get to the car. It's far away, after all, we technically are breaking and entering and definitely trespassing. The whole way home I get visions of a charred man in the backseat. I'm so scared I won't turn around. I can't remember what I exactly said, but something to the effect of leave us alone, and when I got the balls to turn around again, nothing was there. Thank God. 4. Went back again with a ghost hunting team, nerds I knew with EVP equipment, etc. We're sitting on the stairs mentioned in the previous story, and the nerds are provoking the spirits in a rude way. I don't like it, so I walk away, accompanied by another friend who has been holding my hand the entire time. We go to the bathroom, and I'm telling him how this is the room where I saw the ragged girl and pointed out the window to where I was sitting in the first story. He tells me he feels cold, so we're about to leave, and that's when he got touched. A firm hand to the bottom of his back. He was so convinced I did it, but we were holding hands, so I couldn't have and didn't. Again, he's scared, so we leave. I heard nothing back from the team. To be honest, I never spoke to them again. When I was in my early 20s, I had a job delivering flowers from a small shop. Eventually, a large funeral service corporation absorbed us, and we exclusively delivered flowers to funeral homes and churches. After about a year or so, the corporation began offering a package that included flowers to be sent to the gravesite or crypt yearly on the anniversary of the decedent, sometimes ongoing for years. This was also offered to previously buried people, so my job then began to include finding old graves or crypts, often in older, less populated locations. I had to search for a crypt in a large mausoleum located in an older cemetery. The mausoleum was 3 stories, with a courtyard in the middle, surrounded by hundreds of crypts with plaques indicating names, dates, etc. Because it was an older location, it had unorganized files, so often, we only had a general idea of where to find the crypt to place the flowers. I had only been there to deliver funeral flowers. The place itself, while seemingly normal, just had a weird, heavy presence, not unusual in and of itself. Obviously, it was a mausoleum, but I'd been to others, and they just seemed like a place of business. Despite its carpeted, hushed, and well-lit interior thanks to the large windows, this mausoleum always seemed empty, and I always felt watched. I'd usually just drop the flowers off and head to my next stop, but in this particular instance, I had to find a certain crypt. Of course, it was a cloudy, overcast, drizzling afternoon. We'd had a run of storms, and the area had flooded, so huge industrial fans had been set up to dry the carpet in the place. The lights were not on since likely there were no services scheduled that day. Only the light from the windows was available for me to search. On top of this, the mausoleum had an overhead speaker system that played hymns on a constant rotation, mostly just instrumental, but occasionally with a choir singing along. That, of course, was on me, comforting me as I searched this huge, dark, empty mausoleum for one small crypt. As I mentioned, it had a very oppressive air, made more so by the storm. As I wandered, it became even more pronounced, as even the fans seemed muted. The religious iconography around me, statues, paintings, and a huge carved relief of the crucifixion, seemed to glare at me, and the quiet rustling from who knows where kept me off balance. After about 20 minutes, I was about to just leave when I spotted the crypt. Of course, it was about 4 spaces up, too high for me to reach the flower holder. Normally, there is a hook located at each end of the hallways to be used to put flowers on high niches like that. Mine was missing. I went to the next hallway to retrieve it. As I'm coming back to the crypt, I see that I'm in a different place than I expected. I must have taken a wrong turn. I go back to where I thought I made that wrong turn. It was a dead end. In fact, the place to hang the flower hook is there with a hook on it, meaning that wasn't the one I took my hook from. I turn around and realize there is a wall right behind me. The wall is literally right behind me. I start to think maybe I should leave, but I still have the flowers and hook in my hand. I speed up to the next corridor, determined to drop the flowers in the niche, leave the hook on the ground, and book. The corridor I turned into was a short one, totally different from the one I was originally in. The crypt I'd found earlier was nowhere in sight. At that point I was like, "Duck it, sorry person in the crypt, you aren't getting your flowers." As I started heading toward the main entrance, I could feel the pressure getting heavier, and honestly, more of a feeling of dread and maybe, outright fear, began to become more pronounced. I was feeling a bit silly about the whole thing as I came into the main lobby and could see the doors. As I came up to them, they opened from the outside, and in walked a director that I was slightly familiar with. He jumped about 3 feet off the ground when we saw each other. After he caught his breath, he asked what I was doing in here. I explained that I was delivering flowers for a crypt. I didn't say anything about my experience, however. He gave me a strange look and said, "How'd you get in here?" "I'm just opening up now," I stuttered. "That doors were wide open, and I just walked right in." He just nodded. I think he assumed someone on staff had left them unsecured. He didn't say anything else, but as I got into my delivery vehicle, he waved but had a strange look on his face. Not long after this incident, I moved on to another job. I've driven by that cemetery a few times. In fact, I have several relatives buried there and have attended services, but I have never been back into the mausoleum. I wonder if it still has the feeling of dread and if I'd get lost in the corridors again. I've been tempted to take a peek in again since it is open to the public every day, but I don't know if I should take my chances. We went to Dudleytown in the early 90s. It's an abandoned settlement on Mohawk land in Connecticut. We went there for a school trip, and it was as boring and historic as you'd expect. There are abandoned cellars in the ground where homes used to stand, and a lot of them still had artifacts in them at the time. It was a nice day in the woods and rather boring and uneventful. My brother and his friend had taken the same field trip a few years prior. We all decided to go back one night. I loaded my camera with film and grabbed a crucifix my grandma gave me. It was basically just the same place, but nighttime, until something got weird. And it's strange for me to describe the heaviness and oppression this area brings. There's nothing obviously or terribly wrong going on there. It's just an old village. But the pressure that weighs on you when you go is wild. It is both immense and ever-present. It seeps out of everything. The air is heavy. Things that would be enjoyable, like a nice trail or beautiful trees, just kind of stand out, like these things waiting to spring to life and hurt you. It's as if you're perpetually perched on the brink of a knife or perched on the edge of a cliff. We didn't see orbs or ghouls, but the film in my camera disappeared, and my crucifix fell apart. That really shook me up. I remember loading that film, the way the gear felt under my thumb. The camera never left my sight, and it would have been impossible to just fall out. My crucifix was soldered together but then looked like two really hot, molten fingers pressed it where the 4 points met in the center, and it fell apart. I was just holding it in my hand, and I looked back at it, and it's broken into pieces. I couldn't even understand what was going on when that went down because it was such an abnormal thing to happen. Would I ever go back? No. Have people seen even wilder things there? Yeah, I think so. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of the stories coming out of there were true. It is both normal and horrific in old New England at the same time. It is just an exceptionally strange place to be, and it stays with you. Wichita Falls State Hospital abandoned building. When I was a kid, I had a long history of being admitted to mental hospitals. This was due to mental health issues. One of the many hospitals I went to was Wichita Falls State Hospital in Texas. The facility is really old and gives off an abandoned vibe. There is one building that was well known for being eerie. It was one of the old mental hospitals. The history is unclear, but it's rumored to be haunted and definitely gives off an eerie feeling. So my first encounter with the building was when they took us to the rec center. It's located directly next to the building. The staff used vans to transport all the patients around the facility, and we always parked next to it. We often stayed there until it got dark. One night there was a loud rummage noise and huge crash that came from one of the higher levels of the building. Thereafter, the staff had to investigate it because they had to make sure none of the patients ran into the building. No less than 5 minutes after they entered, one of the biggest guys I've ever seen bolted out, looking pale, and instructed everyone to return to the van. Later, when he came back on another shift, we asked him what happened. He said something huge moved rapidly out of the corner of his eyes, and he said his body just reacted without thinking. After that, we always avoided it when we left at night. Another unsettling aspect of the building was the bedrooms, which were consistently cold, dark, and eerily silent. My bedroom window looked out at the abandoned building, so that made it hard to sleep after that event, so that's one of my many experiences with the building. Late night exploring gone wrong. My friend and I had decided one summer night to go to this place called the Slaughterhouse one evening. Where I grew up, there were a lot of urban legends about this place and the road it was on, Empire Mine RD. This road was located in the Bay Area of CA, and the road was shut down after many accidents had happened, and it was deemed unsafe. The trail was still open for walking. Well, we had decided to go alone. I know 2 youngish girls at night at an abandoned place, not the smartest. In the past, we had gone in a group of 4 or 5 people and always found other explorers there. Because of this, we didn't think much of going alone and felt pretty safe. I had brought a film camera with me, hoping to capture something possibly otherworldly on film to serve as evidence. I also carried a pocket knife as a precautionary measure and for peace of mind, given the frequent gatherings of homeless individuals and the persistent rumors of satanic rituals, despite my knowledge that these rumors were most likely false. We started the 20-minute walk to the slaughterhouse itself, and this time it felt really different. About a minute or 2 into the walk, I felt heavy with dread and fear, but I would rather not say anything and creep out my friend or seem like I was chickening out. We made it up the final turn to a straightaway where it sounded like we were next to a freeway, but at this point we were at least a mile off from the nearest road. The loud sounds of cars and car doors closing were supposedly the remains of all the accidents that happened along that road, but I wasn't so sure. I just figured sounds were carried with the wind from the faraway freeways/roads. We made it down the final stretch, hopped the fence, and found ourselves on the property. The place was very different from the last time. It looked as if it had burned, and the buildings were blocked off by rubble, so there really wasn't much to do. I walked to the buildings I had photographed on a previous visit for comparison and began joking with my friend as I started feeling a bit more comfortable. I don't remember what I was exactly doing, but I turned my back on the building. My friend stared at me and dead seriously was like, "Come here now," and I walked over like, "What's the matter?" Apparently, she had seen a dark figure with red eyes behind me. I didn't personally see it, so I don't know if that was to scare me or not. But as I stepped towards her, I saw a dark truck traveling the road we had just walked on. This was really weird because the road was gated off, and we parked in front of the gate, which meant no one could come through without moving our car. Our car had not been moved, so it would be nearly impossible for a car to get through. I can't stress this enough, but it would have been nearly impossible for a car to get through past our car and the locked gate. The truck was dark and barely visible with no lights on, and it didn't make any sound like road or engine noise. This dark truck pulled up to the gate we had hopped, and we heard yelling to get off my property. We couldn't see anyone in the truck, and it was barely lit up. As soon as it was there, it was gone and with no sound. Neither of us saw a gun, but we both swore he had one. I was like, let's get out before whoever or whatever comes back. I nearly ran the mile back, and I'm not someone to run. Once we hit the final stretch, I could see what looked like police lights. We told each other to just remain calm, and we'd be fine. Once we got there, the police greeted us politely, and we returned the politeness, hoping to score points. They had said that they received a jumbled up call that was very odd, but what they caught was that there were people on the road. They seemed to be confused by the call as we were. My friend had said we were just walking the road to see the place at night and never actually hopped the fence, and thank God they believed it. After a few insulting remarks about us being two females on a road at night, we were on our way. We stopped at a well-lit gas station to catch our breath and agreed, never again. I no longer live near this area, but after that I swore I'd never go back, certainly not at night. I still think about this night, and it perplexes me everything that happened. I told myself that it was just the owner, but it just doesn't make sense how they could have gotten through our car and that gate and the confusion the police had as well. In addition, many of the photos I took turned up as pitch black even though I had flashlights and flash on. I had a few develop and look normal, but I chalked it up to being bad film, but the same thing happened with the pictures I took on my phone as well. Overall, this experience has puzzled me. Abandoned mental facility experience. So not too long ago, I and my friends, being 16 and 19, discovered an abandoned building that was extremely close to our local high school. It is only separated by a highly trafficked nature center with trails from the high school end of it to the abandoned facility, so being in a science class years prior where we navigated these trails every day, I was surprised to have never found it. After telling me about it at lunch, I and about 3 friends decided to go after school to the building, and I was surprised that it was in a huge property that held about 8 football fields worth of random church-type buildings that were separated by about 50 yards each and were pretty massive individually. On our way back, we navigated the first building, which was the most run down and also one of the largest. A back door was simply propped open with a brick, and once you entered, you were exposed to a very long, narrow, dark hallway with many doors opening up to it and the smell of moldy drywall and dust. The wallpaper was creepily peeling off just about everywhere, and walking down the hallway, we noticed that some rooms were in a relatively 9 out of 10 condition, while others had the drywall between them completely rotted out, leaving a pile on the floor of disgusting brown and green rotting material, with the ceiling caving in. After we explored the entire building, we realized that it was completely symmetrical in some sense, and eerily each room was labeled things like bedroom, dining hall, etc., and we found rooms that seemed to have padding and heavy doors that were recognized to be little cell-type rooms for distressed mental people, like calm-down rooms. After realizing this and reading an old boiler note we found in the boiler room, which had stairs leading down to a completely flooded basement that was very creepy looking, it read that this was an old mental facility. We found a room that my friends had set up previously with about 8 chairs set up in a circle to smoke we'd smile, and we came back a few days later with literally 8 people, and it was pretty lit, being midday and safe feeling, until one of us had the idea to start scaring each other and separating from the group. Everyone kept doing this for about 20 minutes, sneaking away with a buddy or two to slam doors and jump scare the rest of the lot. However, we started to notice that we weren't alone, there was someone or something else in the building with us. I and my friend Twig, his nickname, were off to sneak from the rest and scare them as usual when we noticed feet from the other side of the door, saw the door rattle like it had been kicked or punched, and saw the footsteps walk away from under it. Scared shitless, we ran back to the rest of the group, still in the chair room, and told them, but they didn't believe us as everyone kept saying they saw something, and we assumed it was bullshit, and everyone was trying to scare each other. Eventually someone had a grand old idea for us all to congregate in this chair room and be completely silent and listen for noises, and to our surprise, we all heard sounds from the other side of the building, echoing towards us. Furthermore, I and a friend about 10 minutes prior, because of pure boredom, both threw chairs down the hall to make a noise to scare everyone, and we looked back down the hall seconds later to notice that both of the chairs went very far, like very far down the hall. About 30 feet. With all of this, we all dipped very quickly in our cars, left, and never came back until about a week later, when we found all of the windows that had been smashed, not by us, but were there before, and the doors that were open were all boarded up and locked up. We think that the city is keeping these buildings locked up for a reason, or if they don't know something is lurking in the moldy, despairing darkness, good thing they did. Unsettling memorial found while urbexing. Hey all, tonight a buddy and I went exploring a place we've previously been. But upon arrival, both my friend and I felt a longing sense that was not previously present. We felt instinctively more on edge and aware of our surroundings. Upon making it to the factory, we pulled out our radio to keep an eye on security and listened. Upon listening, we heard what sounded to be an alarm system. To be certain, we ventured down near the sound. Upon making it to the front entry, we found what looked to be a mangled Raggedy Ann doll. Unsettling? Yes. Frightening? Not quite. Upon feeling relatively secure, we then ventured into a building. Once we entered, we felt a sense of heaviness and dread. Upon walking further, we found used needles that looked as if they had been used very recently. When venturing further, I led down a staircase. Once at the base, I was suddenly startled by what sounded to be a charging sound towards me. Worried for my friend, I called to him to see there was no one but him around me. Once we were both at the bottom, I noticed to my left what appeared to be a memorial. The note made mention of someone, a kid not too much younger than us that had been dismembered and whose entire body had yet to be found. A scary 5 weeks prior to our visit tonight. With that being said, the note looks off? Strangely composed, a trap maybe. The more I look at the picture trying to figure it out, the more dreadful and near tears I feel. At a loss, we're looking for any additional possible explanations. The Midnight Teen Urbex Adventure. This story happened a while back. I was 15 to 16 at the time and was a member of a youth group. Normally we just gather Saturday afternoon and have some fun with games organized by our older people who are in charge. However, this time we were able to stay for the entire weekend. So Saturday morning till Sunday afternoon. I was in the oldest group, with 3 others. 2 of them were a year younger than my friend and I. We had a great day Saturday playing different games with the younger children, etc. When the night came, we could stay up longer. So we sat around the campfire with our leaders and just chilled a bit. It was getting late, and the 2 younger ones went to sleep. They watched YouTube all night. My friend and I, who are about the same age, were talking when he suggested we could do anything. Most leaders were either asleep or assumed we wouldn't do anything reckless. So he began talking about this abandoned vacation home for schools from a big city. I'm a fervent urbexer, so this piqued my interest. We were located next to the sea, so it was common for bigger, more inland cities to make places of residence for their schools to come and enjoy the sea. But this one was abandoned for some reason. And that's how we went take a walk at around 23:30, for about an hour and a half. We had to travel through some forest paths, and that's how we ended up on a big road in a pretty nice neighborhood. At the end of this road was located this pretty big building. It was sinister, the city lights made it look yellowish, and all the windows were broken. I saw that pretty much all entries were boarded up and asked my friend how we could even get in. That's when he told me there was a path through the dunes connecting to some roads. I asked him how he knew this, and he said he spent a lot of time there having fun. He also knew there was a squatter, but basically everyone in the region knew him, and he even talked to the man sometimes. We climbed over a gate and entered the complex through some broken doors. It was already midnight by then, so we had to use our phone flashlights to see. The floor was full of rubble and broken glass. It smelled moldy. Each room was dark and humid. I could only see 5 meters in front of me. I was already pretty scared but manned up and followed my friend. We went up to the 3rd floor via the first stairwell because this is where my friend and his friends hang out. You could see that his friends hung there sometimes. There was less rubble, the air was filled with the smell of fireworks, and the ground was littered with trash such as cans and chips. We had some fun adventuring. It was a great time. All of a sudden I was completely alone. I stood still and heard a banging noise from a room a bit further. I went to check, a bit hesitant and pretty scared. That's when I saw my friend, who had just been kicked out of a counter, come out of the room with a sink in his hand. I was relieved but a bit confused why he had a damn sink in his hand. He looked at me and smiled and told me to follow him. So I did. He led me to a room with broken windows. Almost all the windows were broken in this building, so I wasn't alarmed. Suddenly my friend had the great idea to throw the sink through a hole in the glass. I watched as it fell 3 floors and broke on impact. I looked at him, and he had a big smile, so did I. In my innocent adolescent mind, I thought to myself, this is the coolest thing I ever saw. We laughed loudly, a bit too loudly. Not even a minute later, my friend told me to turn off my flashlight after hearing some noise, plunging us in total darkness. Then, we heard a scream. A scream so satanic it could hardly be discerned as human. Yet it was. Our big, exciting stunt had woken up the squatter that lived here, and he wasn't too happy about it. We heard him banging and breaking things. I and my friend went straight to the 2nd stairwell because we knew he would be at the 1st. Luckily, most of the building was dimly lit by street lights. My heart was beating senselessly, but I had my breathing under control. After years of playing scary hide and seek games in the forest nearby with my friends at night and other things I did with friends, I had mastered this. I was scared shitless, but my thoughts were clear. We had to get out of there. We slowly descended each stair, checking every door. Until we ended up on the first floor. We couldn't go any further. A bed, placed up against the stairwell, blocked us. We had to return to the second floor. That's also when I noticed the silence, the dreadful silence. All the banging and screaming had stopped as suddenly as it started. The squatter was stalking us, making no noise, like a predator stalking its prey. Making it more nervous and panicky each second that passed. We silently made our way to the first stairwell and stopped for a while. Standing almost perfectly still like statues. The squatter knew we had to get out of there through that exit. It was the only way out. I looked up to my friend, and he asked me if I was ready to run. I nodded, and we counted to 3. Big breath, 1, 2, 3. Go. We both rushed through the stairwell, jumping multiple stairs at once. Our hearts pounding, every step meticulously calculated not to fall or step on any broken glass or rubble. Finally exhaling and inhaling as hard as we could. First floor. Right, through the double door. There it was, the exit. My legs are outputting more force than ever before. In the final sprint, I looked back. My friend was there. We jumped through the broken door and leapt the fence. A last sprint to the road, and it was over. My heart pounded, my eyes widened, and my body tensed. I was standing there in front of my friend. With the biggest smile ever. That's when I became addicted to adrenaline. Nothing could satisfy me more than that feeling. We walked back to the campsite, and nobody asked us anything. Since then, I have told this story countless times to others and went back to the home too. I may have been a bit too scared or paranoid currently, but it was a great moment. This is a story I can confidently share with others. I admit that I was quite innocent and naive at the time. Many people wouldn't even have dared to step foot in that building. But I did, and it made a friendship and story I'll never forget. I was scared shitless, though, that's true. The Farmhouse. I know the title sounds funny, but I'll give you some context to understand. My family has owned a generational farm for a very long time, probably since the late 1800s. On this farm there is a very old house that has been on the farm way longer than anyone knows. My mother told me stories of how the house was used as a place for families to take post-mortem photographs with their deceased loved ones, almost like a funeral home. However, that was long ago, and the farmhouse was now used to live in. Due to the strange history of the house, there was always some speculation of it being haunted. My mother's aunt told us a story about how her grandmother would talk to someone in the kitchen while she cooked dinner. However, these accounts were second-hand stories. After hearing about this, my uncle decided to investigate for himself. Just some insight, this farm is 2 hours away from us in a very old town. The next time my uncle visited, he went inside and took some photos and was shocked at the results. He showed us a picture where, in the corner of the kitchen, you can make out a black figure in the corner. This was small compared to what we would discover. Fast forward to around a couple of months later, we go down to the farm for a holiday as we do every year. We all talked about how we were going to go into the house and check things out because why not? The fragile condition of the roof and floors had kept the house empty for some time. My uncle gathers a crowd of around 7 family members who had seen the photo. Our plan was to first find the corner of the room and take another photo, but on my dad's professional camera, a very expensive piece of equipment. He goes to take a photo of the spot, and the camera doesn't work. He keeps trying, but nothing happens. So we go outside to figure it out, and the second my dad walks outside and tries to take a photo, it works. So we were all pretty confused. We walk back in, the camera doesn't work again. This was obviously pretty freaky, but nothing too serious. Until my aunt out of nowhere goes, "Ow," and yells at her daughter that she scratched her. But my cousin exclaims to her that she never even touched her. We look at her forearm, and there is a long scratch going down her arm. After this, we walk out onto the porch again to see if everyone is okay and if anybody wants to stop. My aunt obviously didn't want to continue because she was freaked out to the core. All of a sudden, while we are standing there, this old vacuum just falls down and breaks. Nobody was even near it, but this could have just been the wind or something else. So we continue back inside after standing there just talking about everything. We start walking through the rest of the house. Nothing too exciting is happening other than the fear in our heads. The journey continues until we reach the basement. Just my dad and I walk down while the others stay up top, and it was a very eerie way down. I shine my flashlight into the very dark basement with no lights because the electricity hadn't worked in years. I shine to my right and see a concrete wall with a giant hole in it. I don't know why, but it was odd to see and is stuck in my mind. I still wonder what was in it. I shine my light to the left and see very old-fashioned jar bottles and stuff everywhere. My grandfather, for some reason, loved collecting jars. So I and my dad are now sitting there just looking at stuff and talking out to something, asking it to show us a sign if they are there. After about 30 seconds of no reply or sign, we head up. Not even 2 steps later, a glass bottle comes flying and smashing the wall behind us. I and my dad both froze and just stared at each other before we ultimately bolted out of the house. My father had never believed in ghosts until that day. He even told me that he never believed, but he believed that something was in that house and didn't want us there. We all discussed after this to not do that again, and we later realized that it was almost like whatever was in there targeted those who weren't in the family by blood. For instance, the scratch was on my aunt's arm, who was not blood, and my father was closest to the jar that was thrown, who was not by blood, obviously on my mother's side. You can take this story how you will, let me know what you think. To this day, I am a firm believer in spirits. Girlfriend witnessed a gathering that I could not see on abandoned local cult property. Bear with me because I have never shared before, as I have never had a reason to until now. I'm looking for some sort of explanation or feedback for this because I and my girlfriend are both thoroughly freaked out, and she is adamant about what she saw, and I am as well. I have never seen her this scared before, and we have been together for 2 years now. Some history of the area before I get into the story so it will maybe make more sense. In the early 60s to the late 80s in the area that I live in, a small town in southern Illinois, there was a local group of Christian conservatives that was very much a cult. A large mansion replicating Mount Vernon, George Washington's, estate was built in the center of the property with cabins in the surrounding areas and an airstrip also on the property. Nowadays the mansion and everything else is full of old junk and has been long forgotten, and the man who built it and was head over everyone is gone as well. My girlfriend and I have explored the property several times, and I have also done so with another close friend. This will be relevant later. Today it was a nice breezy day, and we decided we were going to go exploring this evening. So we hit a couple of spots and saved the mansion for last. When we arrive, we go through the mansion and some of the property as usual. However, we made the decision to venture into an area of the property that is significantly more challenging to access and has never been explored before. I and my close friend have been towards this area, but we didn't go any further because he didn't want to and was obviously unsettled but wouldn't tell me why. We get as close as I did with my friend, and I point out a clearing in some trees that has a fairly dry, rocky creek bed that we could cut through. The only thing that I noticed that seemed off was that the water appeared very, very dark and cold for how sunny it was outside. This occurred around 6 or 7 p.m. on a sunny evening in Illinois. It's still practically daylight outside. My girlfriend stares at this creek bed for a while and begins acting uneasy and terrified, telling me that we need to leave. I shrug it off and tell her we can just keep walking to where we plan to go and that she's just being paranoid and jumpy. She's still visibly shaken as we keep walking, insisting that we need to leave and that we shouldn't be here. As we are walking, we hear things from the area on the property we were heading towards banging and crashing. We beat feet back to my truck, and she tells me she saw a large gathering of men in blue uniforms gathered down in the creek, looking away from us as if they were watching something very intently. She said that there were a lot of them, and it gave her a very bad feeling watching them as if it was something we were not supposed to be seeing. Looking through the clearing, I'm not going to lie, I felt uneasy, and she refused to look again on the walk back. Does anyone have any idea what could have happened here or any explanation at all? Thank you. The Abandoned Village. My name is Jack, and I have been a professional traveler for 12 years. A few months ago, a friend of mine mentioned an allegedly abandoned village deep within the forest near our town. He estimated it would take about a week to reach the village. He believed that if the stories were true, it would be the perfect destination for me to explore and investigate the mysterious disappearance of the villagers. I was immediately intrigued and agreed to embark on this journey. The prospect of uncovering the truth about this village was thrilling. If the village did exist, I could potentially go down in history for discovering it and revealing its secrets. This could even cement my reputation as the best traveler there is. I was dreaming of fame, and after a week of traveling and camping out in the forest, I was more than shocked and thrilled to realize that this village did indeed exist. I found myself standing on the outskirts, staring into this empty, eerie village. The village was silent, with vines and foliage overgrowing the place, covering every crumbling building and home. Windows were shattered, and doors hung off their hinges, creaking in the soft wind. The streets were devoid of any signs of life, and the air was thick, as if the village itself was holding its breath. The sky above had turned gray, casting dark shadows all around me and creating a somber, haunting scene. As I wandered through the empty streets, I noticed remnants of what once was a child's toy abandoned in the middle of the road, a cart tipped over with its contents spilled and rotting, and a well that looked like it hadn't been used in years. The village seemed frozen in time, a ghostly reminder of a life that once thrived here. Suddenly, I heard a faint scurrying sound, like something was searching for something else. My heart began to race as I followed the noise, leading me to the center of the village. The sound grew louder, more frantic, echoing off the walls of the empty buildings. My curiosity was tinged with fear as I approached the source of the noise. There, in the shadows, I saw it, a creature unlike anything I had ever seen before. It had an alien, demonic appearance. Skin that seemed to shift colors in the dim light, blending seamlessly with its surroundings. Its eyes glowed a menacing red, and its elongated limbs ended in sharp, claw-like fingers. It moved with a disturbing grace, its head constantly twitching as it searched for something. Me. I quickly ducked behind a dilapidated wall, trying to steady my breathing. The creature's movements became more frantic, and its guttural growls filled the air. I could hear it getting closer, its claws scraping against the ground. I peeked out from my hiding spot and saw the creature's eyes scanning the area, narrowing as it sensed my presence. The fear was unbearable. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to remain as still as possible. The creature was now just a few feet away, its breath hot and foul, reeking of decay. I could see its shadow growing larger on the ground, inching closer and closer as it crept up behind me. The air around me felt thick with tension, every second stretching into an eternity. Just as it seemed the creature would find me, a sudden noise from a tree limb falling in the opposite direction distracted it. The sharp crack of the branch echoed through the still air, causing the creature to whip its head around and dart toward the sound. Its swift, predatory movements were both terrifying and mesmerizing. This unexpected diversion gave me the precious seconds I needed to make my escape. I sprinted through the village, not daring to look back. My legs burned with exertion, and my lungs felt like they were on fire, but I couldn't afford to slow down. The enraged howls of the creature echoed behind me, growing louder and more desperate. With every ounce of strength, I pushed myself forward, dodging obstacles and leaping over debris. The streets now felt like a treacherous maze, each turn and corner a potential trap. However, I was left with no alternative but to continue running, clinging to the hope that I could evade the encroaching nightmare. The village seemed to stretch endlessly, each step feeling like it took me further into a nightmarish labyrinth. The creature was gaining on me now, its presence a constant, terrifying weight at my back. I could hear its claws pounding the ground behind me, each thud a reminder of how close it was. As I ran, I caught glimpses of more creatures lurking in the shadows, their eyes glowing with the same malevolent light. They watched me with predatory interest, their forms shifting and blending with the darkness. The village was teeming with them, and I realized with growing horror that I had stumbled into a nest of these nightmarish beings. Panic surged through me, threatening to overwhelm my senses, but I forced myself to stay focused. I knew that one wrong move, one moment of hesitation, could be my last. The narrow, winding streets seemed to close in around me, each corner hiding new dangers. My only hope was to keep moving, to stay one step ahead of the terror that hunted me. As more creatures lunged out and began to chase me, I could hear my heart thumping in my chest, feeling as though it was about to explode. Finally, I reached the edge of the village and plunged into the forest, the creatures' cries fading into the distance. The dense trees provided a temporary refuge, and I didn't stop running until I was sure I was far enough away. I collapsed against a tree, gasping for breath, my body trembling with exhaustion and fear. Out of breath and trembling, I made it back to civilization. I warned everyone I knew and met to stay away from the abandoned village, telling them of the horrifying creatures I had encountered. The village was abandoned for a reason, and I knew I was lucky to have barely made it out alive. The tale of my harrowing escape spread quickly, serving as a grim reminder of the dangers that lurked in the forgotten corners of the world. I was camping in a remote/abandoned ranger station and nearly lost my life, or worse. Labor Day of 2015, my mother, my wife and 3 children, and I went to a very remote cabin that we rented out. It was an old fire watchman station or something of the sort, so it had the cabin and 3 other sheds/shops. I will keep it short now, but this is a bizarre story. We unpacked, settled into the cabin, and then decided to walk a couple hundred yards down to the river, barefoot and in sandals with shorts for all of us. We got down to the pebbled shore and were playing/throwing rocks, etc., when I realized there were about 1 snakes everywhere. My wife, Mom, and I yanked up the 3 kids and boogied off. After reaching a safe distance from them, I went back with a water bottle and caught one in it to see what it was. It turned out we were in a nest of diamondback rattlesnakes. If one of those things had latched onto one of my kids, they surely would have died. We were about 3 hours away from any medical facility. We got back to the cabin, and my mom and I went for a hike/walk alone while my wife calmed the kiddos and fed them lunch. Upon returning about 15 minutes later, all 3 of my kids and my wife were inside with the doors and windows all closed up. Even though we had everything open to cool the place off, we went inside to hear all 4 of them start yelling about a bear that was about 150 yards from the cabin, huffing and puffing at the wife and kids on the front porch, eating. It was down by the river, another 30 yards or so down the hill that he poked his head up and over from. A few hours go by, and in that time, an ATV passed by 3 times with 2 inbred-looking freaks on it, and each time they stopped in front of the gate on the property and stared at us or the cabin. Keep in mind, we're 2 hours into the wilderness in Idaho and hadn't seen anyone else the entire trip except for them. We decide it's time for the kids to go to bed, as it's completely dark outside. Within 10 minutes, our son, 5 at the time, went from being perfectly fine/active/talkative to having a fever of 103 degrees Fahrenheit, slightly foaming at the mouth, and being completely unresponsive. That was it. We were leaving immediately and going to seek medical attention. I opened the front door of the cabin to start loading the 2 cars, by the light of one porch bulb and the headlights on the cars, which were both parked facing the gate, and that's when we all 3, adults, heard about 4 to 6 large and heavy animals running all around the cabin and property. There was one on the right side of the house, when exiting, that I could hear pacing back and forth and breathing heavy. I made everyone stay inside and close the door every time I went outside to transfer stuff to the cars, about 4 to 5 trips. I had a stick and a big pot that I was smacking as hard and loud as I could each trip and was yelling loudly at random. As soon as I'm all done loading, I take each kid out individually and load them up between the 2 cars, escort my mom out, and then my wife out. My wife and I were in the lead car. As we arrived, I felt it necessary to close the gate for some inexplicable reason. Therefore, I exited my vehicle, walked approximately 15 feet behind it in my mother's car, and closed the gate. Now, this gate was literally a log that slid from one post to the other. It offered zero protection/barrier between me and the animals out there. Right as I went to turn around, I heard loud padded footsteps walking up to me, directly in front of me no more than 10 feet. And then I saw eyes shimmering from the moonlight as the deepest, scariest growl I have ever heard in my life. I turned and ran so fast that I swear I must have jumped from where I was to the driver's seat of my car some 30 feet behind me, and as I landed in my seat, I slammed it into drive and spun out, finally leaving. It gets weirder/scarier, though. About 15 minutes down the road, we were still panicking about our unresponsive son, and we both kept having this horrible, evil doom feeling fast, a shadow over us. I looked down and realized I still had that baby rattlesnake in the water bottle in my cup holder, so I grabbed it and threw it out the window immediately. Not even 2 minutes later we hear our son softly crying. We realize he's responsive, and he stated something along the lines of, "Why are we leaving? What's going on?" He was crying because he was sad to leave. He couldn't remember the last hour or so at all. Quick backstory for what's next. My mother was about 58 years old at the time. She's been a Jehovah's Witness my whole life, plus many more years beforehand, and she is the last person in the world to believe in signs, evil spirits, omens, etc. The next day, my mom broke down extremely bad, sobbing her eyes out, hardly able to talk. She confessed to my wife that the night before we left, she had a nightmare in which we went on the camping trip, we came across snakes, a bear, and a pack of wolves. She said she knew a lot of bad things happened at that outpost and it was full of evil. Most of all, she said, one of your kids died. I swear on my life, to this very day, if I ask her who died and how it happened, she immediately starts crying and refuses to tell me or anyone. She lives her life now with the guilt that she willingly ignored her nightmare and put us in the situation, nearly taking one of her dear grandkids away from this world. She doesn't deserve to feel that. I know this sounds all crazy AF, but a week later, on the local news, there were reports of a wolf pack in that area. Wolves and bears may not coexist in harmony, but as far as I know, they do share territories and respect each other. This outpost station of sorts was about 1.5 hours into the wilderness from Lowman/Banks, Idaho, if you want to verify the animals actually exist around there. Sadly, I grew up in the mountains for most of my pre/early teen years, as did my wife until she was 10 years old. I even have a half-sleeve tattoo of wilderness and trees on my left arm. With that said, we no longer enjoy going to the mountains. Thanks for hearing everything out, and I'll leave this too, IDC if you believe me. This was / real to my family's story, and I swear, that night changes a lot of things for us going forward. A house I've never seen. Alright, it's been enough years now that I feel ready to share this story. At the time of this event, I was 20 and a firefighter for the US Army. Everyone is shocked when I say that, but Army bases are basically walled cities, and like any other city, they require firefighters. My best friend was in my unit with me, and for the sake of this retelling, we will call him Jay. Jay and I were on a 48-hour on, 72-hour off schedule, and being two young idiots with more free time than sense, we developed some dumbass hobbies. Urban exploration was our most significant pastime. This had nothing to do with the supernatural, as neither of us had any belief in anything supernatural and simply enjoyed the exploration. It felt like being a sort of archaeologist, except one of more recent history. The place we were stationed in the US was full of abandoned buildings or even entire towns within a few hours' drive. For over a year, we broke into and explored hundreds of abandoned buildings, but nothing supernatural happened, and it consumed us. We spent all our free time exploring or trawling the forums searching for new places to see. It was on one of those forums that I came across about a town, and I mean tiny town, that had an abandoned colonial-style mansion. I will not say the name of the town here. I showed Jay this, and we decided this mansion would be our next exploration. We drove 2 hours from our duty station to this small town, which consisted of only 3 streets, 1 gas station, 1 county tornado shelter, and nothing else. I'm talking about a very small town in the middle of the woods in the southeast United States. We went into the gas station and asked the clerk about the mansion, but she claimed to have never heard of it. I should point out at this point that the entire town just gave off a bad vibe. As a former skeptic, I realize how dumb that sounds, but I really felt, I don't know, threatened. Oppressed? The place appears to be oppressed for no apparent reason. The couple of people we spoke to were nice enough, and the place, while perhaps a bit southern and poor, Mythville-ish, was far from the worst area we had entered in search of an abandoned place to explore. The only thing I noticed odd about the town was that for as small as it was, there were like 5 churches in the town. Not super abnormal for the Bible Belt, but none of the churches bore classic Christian iconography like crosses or some such. They also had slightly odd names like Church of the Light and other slightly obscure non-denominational names. Again, not that weird. The first of the weirdness started after we checked into the hotel we had booked about 15 miles away in the nearest decent-sized city and came back after dark. Veteran urban explorers know to go after dark and avoid using bright lights outside buildings to prevent locals from calling the police. Jay and I drove all around the town for over an hour, which is impressive considering it was woods, a few fields, and 3 streets looking for the mansion. We never found it. We finally parked in the only large parking lot there, the tornado shelter. While we had a smoke and bemoaned the fact we had wasted time on a false lead, we noticed a group of 5 people walking down the side of the road in our direction. Again, not that odd. It got real odd when these 5 entered the circle of light created by one of the only 5 street lights in the town, all in the parking lot of this county tornado shelter, and didn't become any clearer to see. That doesn't sound scary, but picture this. At approximately midnight, a figure is approaching a brightly lit area. While they approach, they are hard to make out because you are looking at them from an illuminated area into a dark area. They would be hard to see, night vision being what it is and disrupted by the light you are standing in. There is nothing unusual about that situation. But when these 5 walked into the light I was parked under, all 5 did not become illuminated. Again, it doesn't sound scary in the telling, but seeing 5 human-shaped dark patches standing directly under a streetlight where anyone, even someone with a dark complexion and black clothing, would have had at least some detail was terrifying. I don't mean this was a dark person in dark clothing standing in the light, I mean this was somehow 5 person-shaped patches of pure black standing in a well-lit area not 10 to 15 feet from us. The light had literally no effect on them. At that point Jay and I said FK this and hauled ass out of that town. That was odd and would have been scary enough, but the second and final supernatural effect of my visit there was the dreams. I would like to again remind you I never saw the mansion with my own eyes. Jay and I, however, spent nearly a year having the same nightmare about the mansion that, again, I shouldn't be able to say was there. The dream starts with me walking down a path in the forest for a few seconds before I enter a clearing and see an old but well-kept 3-story whitewood Victorian-style house with a whitewood wraparound deck and large wood columns. I walk up the dirt path to 3 wood steps up onto the porch and then up to the green-painted double doors. I feel sick to my stomach in this place and feel something wants me to come inside very bad, but at the same time, I am 100% certain that I should not enter the house. I open the right double door, and all I can see inside the house is pitch black. I wake up. That dream doesn't sound scary from an outsider's view, and I get it will be super anticlimactic to anyone listening to this, but that's because I am recounting a real thing I lived through and not a dope fictional story. I had that exact same nightmare and felt the exact same pull to a place I very much should not enter for almost exactly a year after I went to that godforsaken town. It was scary enough on its own for me, but it wasn't until a slightly drunken conversation with Jay a couple of years later, after I went to visit him as our army duties had taken us to different places in the world, that he would mention something about the dreams. I asked him what he meant, and he would describe the exact same nightmare for almost the exact same amount of time as I had experienced. And that, dear reader, is it. That's my super anticlimactic story about the one and only genuine supernatural experience I had nearly 10 years ago. I still have the dreams once in a while, but whatever is in that town, I am 100% certain that there is a mansion there and something lives in it. Those events took place over 10 years ago, and my life has changed since then. I am no longer in the army, and I am too old and too busy with family matters to engage in urban exploration. Not the most exciting story on the platform, but it's the only true one I have ever had, and it still makes me shudder to this day. I think that thing wanted me to find the mansion and kept trying to get me to come back, but who knows? All I do know is I will never go back to that podunk little town, and no, I will not tell anyone in the comments what the name of the place is or even what state it is in. Believe me or don't, but I will have no part in sending someone else into that place because something very wrong lives there. Shadow figure in abandoned prison. To give context, from a small town in Georgia named Milledgeville, and one of two things. You either don't know the town or you do. And if you have heard of the town, it's probably because of its association with Ben Roethlisberger or because of Central State Hospital, also known as Georgia State Sanatorium or Milledgeville State Hospital. By the 1960s, Central State was known as the largest mental hospital in the world, with some 200 plus buildings on the campus. You could almost equate it to a military base where it was basically self-sufficient. Had its own post office, kitchens, nursing homes, several prisons, police, and fire departments. The campus had been closed since 2010, with just a few of the buildings being operational for the Department of Corrections Training Division, Probation and Parole Office, which just closed as of 2024. One night, a fire broke out in one of the prisons, the men's state prison, which had been inactive since 2011. Being a volunteer firefighter at the time and not knowing when I would have another chance to legally be inside one of the prisons, I responded. I was part of one of the first crews to make an initial fire attack on the fire room. It's been since 2019, and the layout of the place where we made entry is a little fuzzy, so bear with me. We made entry through a maintenance room, made a left into a long corridor, went approximately 30 to 40 feet down the hallway, which then opened up into another corridor both left and right, with rooms on both sides of the hallway. Visibility was limited due to fire and smoke, and it was about midnight. We found the fire room and were able to extinguish most of the fire before having to swap out with another crew because we were running low on air. Using flashlights, I was able to see down the hallway that opened up both ways, and nothing peculiar or out of the normal was there. Even without flashlights, I could kind of make some things out. After the second crew came out, another firefighter and I went in for another time as a mop-up crew, since in the two attacks we made we had pretty much put the fire out. He and I followed the hose line, and not thinking, I didn't grab a flashlight. However, my partner did, so I followed him. Still inside the fire room was one of our investigators, a full-timer, a rookie who went through the same class as me, and of course, myself. Since the guy I went in with on this second pass didn't get to play, as we called it, I let him be the nozzle man, and I fed him hose from the hallway that opened up to the left and right. It was he and the other two firefighters that I mentioned above in the actual fire room. This is where it gets creepy. As I was feeding the guys hose, I looked right down the hallway, and probably about 60 to 70 feet, possibly more, I'm not great with distance at times, I saw a shadow figure standing there. The figure was about 7 to 8 feet tall, skinny, and had red eyes. How I could tell it was a shadow figure was yes, I didn't have a flashlight, and yes, it was dark looking down the hallway, but this figure was darker than anything around it. Wasn't it the people that set the stuff in the prison on fire, because they were the idiots that showed up to the station in person and reported the fire? Nothing electrical in the prison was on and operational because it had been closed since 2011, so nothing red would have been on. I probably looked at it for what seemed like forever, but it was probably only a minute to a minute and a half, before the nozzle man said to back out. I looked at him, acknowledged that I heard him, repeated backing out, and before I knew it, I looked back down the hallway and the figure was gone. Of course, being the only one in the hallway at the time, I was the only one that saw this figure. After this happened, I kept it to myself because I didn't want someone to think I was crazy or make excuses as to what I saw. One day, I was visiting with one of my friends at the outlier station several months later and was just having casual conversations. She had been stationed at the fire station in that district and had just been talking. I'm not sure why I brought it up to her, but I asked her if she had encountered anything unusual in the area. Of course she says, well, it's Central State, if you haven't, then you really haven't been out there. I went into what happened that night, and when I started to mention maybe seeing a shadow figure, she interrupted me and began to describe it to a T, what I saw. 7 to 8 feet, skinny, glowing red eyes. I almost froze cold. Here is the interesting thing, though. I saw this figure in an abandoned prison after midnight. She saw this same exact figure in another building, come to find out, on the opposite side of the campus in broad daylight while she was doing pre-fire plans. I try not to think about it, but it's hard to forget seeing and experiencing something like that. So I guess the moral of the story is, if you go to any of the buildings on Central State grounds, which I don't recommend due to deteriorating conditions of buildings, asbestos, and the fact that you will get arrested for trespassing, just know there might be a shadowy figure waiting to make his presence known to you. But I would also like to know what you all think this spirit, figure, entity, or whatever you would like to call it could be. Especially since it doesn't just linger in one specific building, it seems like. I explored an abandoned mill and discovered something terrible. Sneaking into supposedly haunted buildings late at night always sounded like a laugh, but I don't think so anymore. My town has this old mill. The mill was the town's lifeblood, and there was once much farmland here. You wouldn't know it to look at the place now. The soil surrounding us, stretching for a good couple of miles, is parched and devoid of any growth, while the mill appears to be in disrepair. It has apparently been falling apart since even before it closed down a few decades ago. A series of accidents, where people died, is said to have finally pulled the plug on the old place. Which is where all the ghost stories come from, which in turn are what led to my late-night venture into a building that looked like it would fall on top of me at any moment if I brushed the wrong bit of wall. It was dumb, and the one or two friends I'd told of my plan thought I was going to get myself killed. In hindsight, they were right. But then, hindsight is 20/20, right? The door was easy enough to force. I had the torch function on my mobile phone switched on, and I noticed that the wooden door was barely there anymore. A thick cloud of dust nearly choked me as soon as I opened the door. I couldn't believe I was the first one to try exploring the mill since it closed down, but that's what the air was telling me as I stepped inside. Most of it was wood, just like the outside. The ceiling was supported by decades-old wooden pillars, above which there must have been more machinery, similar to what I saw in this downstairs room. I won't pretend to understand its functions, but the rusted machinery was long past its prime. It looked heavy, though, and I immediately feared the prospect of the ceiling crashing down upon me. But, I reasoned, if it were going to do that, this place would have collapsed years ago, wouldn't it? The thought calmed me slightly but not much. After all, it would have to fall eventually. I was about to climb the stairs, satisfied that nothing was left to see on the ground floor, when the whisper reached me. Help! I spun around, startled, to see absolutely nobody. The room was still as empty as it had been when I broke the door open. My heart raced in my chest from the start the voice had given me. Is that someone mucking about? I asked. There was no answer. I took some slow, deep breaths to calm myself down. It's just my mind playing tricks on me, I thought. This place being spooky is the whole reason you came here. Satisfied that I was alone and that the voice had been nothing more than an illusion produced by my mind's reaction to the darkness around me, I continued on up the stairs. Each one creaked as I planted a foot upon it, and I had visions of the flimsy wood breaking beneath my weight. At least I wouldn't have far to fall. I was right about there being more machinery on the floor above, although I still couldn't tell you what any of it was for. Well, I knew logically that it was for the process of making grain, but you know what I mean. I pointed the flashlight at it and saw that it was just as rusty as the one downstairs. I sighed. Nothing here but rust and dust. Not that I was expecting to find any ghosts or anything, but I was hoping for something marginally more intriguing than old machinery and drifting flakes of crumbling wood. One of the shadows to my left moved, and I bloody near toppled onto my ass, yelling. My heart hammered away its rhythm at a quickened pace, and I pointed my light toward the area of the movement. Nothing. Just more old wood. I was alone, but I was certain that something had moved in here. First your ears, now your eyes, I said to myself shakily, trying to make a joke of it. This darkness is making you lose your marbles. You're the only one here. Only, I found that I didn't believe that anymore. I can't tell you what it was, but I just had an overwhelming feeling that I was no longer alone. I felt like a deer in a clearing who's just begun to suspect a tiger is watching me from the bushes. I could feel my legs tensing, preparing myself to run for the stairs. I stood there for what felt like an hour but was in actuality only a couple of minutes. I breathed to calm myself down again and decided that I really wasn't in the right headspace for this. I was too nervous. Too scared. Prey instincts I didn't even know I had were kicking in, and that couldn't be healthy. I decided to leave. I walked down the stairs, each step toward the front door coming as a relief. Then I saw it. A door. A door I knew hadn't been there when I'd entered the building. I remember sweeping my torch all over the room, and at no point had I seen that door in its light. Down here. Help. It was the same voice as before, whispering in my ear so closely that I should have felt their breath on my lobe. But I felt nothing of the sort. A shiver ran down my spine. Duck this, I thought, and turned to charge at the exit. It was gone. Where once there was the front door, which I had broken open to gain entry in the first place, there was now only more wooden wall. I could bring myself to do nothing but stand and stare for a few minutes. It wasn't possible. The door was there, I knew it was. How could it be gone? What was happening? A scream of primal fear ripped its way out of my throat, and I charged at the wooden wall. The wood was flimsy looking and rotted and should have broken easily, but with every punch I succeeded only in making my fists ache, and with every kick all I made was noise. Noise that reached nobody but myself. Tears of terror and frustration ran down my cheeks in rivers, and I bit my hand to keep from loudly sobbing. I was trapped. My legs buckled beneath me as the truth of my situation finally became clear, and I sat on the dusty wooden floors, my back against the infuriatingly sturdy wooden wall, and I held my head in my hand. What do I do? I must have sat there for hours. The sun didn't rise. No light peeked in through the gaps between the wood planks. Help, the voice came again. This time it was no whisper but a call from beyond the new door. Down here. Help. Well, what else could I do but listen? I stood up on shaky legs, bracing myself against the wall until I was sure I could stand unaided. Then I made my way over to the new door and gently pushed it open. It made a long, high-pitched creaking noise as it opened to reveal a second staircase, one that led down. I didn't want to go down. I wanted to leave, but I couldn't. My only other option was to sit and wait for something to happen, and I thought that might drive me mad. I went down the stairs. Unlike the ones upstairs, these steps didn't creak as I stepped on them. In fact, my footfalls made no noise at all, which, if anything, was even more unsettling. Yet that was not the most terrifying part. The part that scared me most, the part that got my heart racing so badly that I thought it'd beat its way right out of my chest, was the way the stairs just didn't end. I must have been walking down them for a good 10 minutes before the thought occurred to me. My first instinct was to turn around and run back up, but somehow I knew that if I did that, I would be running up forever just as I'd be walking down forever. Maybe I was wrong, but I don't think I was. Keep going, the voice said, whispering from right by my ear once again. Come down. I could see it now, whatever was speaking to me. Only not really. I didn't see what it looked like, but I saw it there, out of the corner of my eye, walking right next to me on the stairs somehow without ever touching me. It was a dark shape that bore only a superficial resemblance to a human body, and it had an abundance of eyes, each glowing a dull yellow and blinking periodically. These eyes covered the entire body. I sped up my descent down the stairs. I knew I wouldn't find an end, but I had to escape whatever was with me. That deeply buried prey instinct rose in me again, this time to the point of damn near screaming at me to run away because the predator was here. But I couldn't get away. No matter how much I picked up speed, it was always there, right by me. Yes, yes, it cried in pleasure. There was a sort of slurping sound. Just like that. Such delicious terror. I screamed. It laughed. And suddenly, I understood. It was eating me, not in body but in soul. With every second of fear, I could feel myself growing weaker. I felt thinner, less substantial. At some point, I knew I would stop existing. I was scared, and that only fed it more of me. But then I realized something else. There were no walls around the staircase. Just a great expanse of darkness beyond the splintered wooden banisters on either side. I had a way out. I stopped running down the stairs, turned, and gripped the banister. Without so much as thinking about the height, I launched myself over the edge. There was a roar of pure rage loud enough to still be ringing in my eardrums now. Then a blinding light. It was the sun. I sat up, and I was outside the mill again. The warmth of the sun felt glorious, and I've never been happier to find myself lying in the grass where all the bugs could crawl all over me. I think I know why the land around our town died. I'm moving soon. I've told everyone else they should do the same, but they aren't listening to me. I hope they come to their senses before it's too late. Because whatever is living in the mill is hungry. Houses on a graveyard. In Texas, on the outskirts of Houston in the east, a 1970s subdivision was built on an 1800s graveyard. The graveyard was considered abandoned, so they cleared the grave markers but not the graves. Eventually, new homeowners dug for pools and discovered these graves. There is a whole Unsolved Mysteries episode called the Black Hope Cemetery. So, we aren't strangers to things moving in my house. And we have always kind of thought it was one of our children that did it. Any parent will know what I mean. We have really only had 2 or 3 experiences where it was undisputedly not one of the kids, and I have only ever been present for the gray ball incident and the keys sliding. Well, about a month ago, I witnessed one more. In my son's room, at night. I was waiting for my son to sleep. I was sitting on the ground as usual, watching some YouTube stuff. Suddenly, I hear something slide across the ground. I looked around to see what was sliding and realized it was the baby bottle that moved. The only reason I became aware of this occurrence was due to a tear in the nipple, which, if not monitored, causes leakage. I noticed there was a milk ring from it leaking on the ground, but it had a smear mark through it like something moved through it. I was a good 4 or 5 feet away from it, so it couldn't have been me bumping it, and my son had just drifted off to sleep. We have also had a ramp up of sounds and sightings. For almost a week straight, I'd hear knocking on walls. Now, is this the house settling during summer? Maybe. However, the house we are in was built in 2021. And the knocking sounds like it is on drywall or wood. I haven't thought of a logical explanation for that one just yet. We have recently observed more black masses, especially in our daughter's room and the living room. One night, while we were in bed watching TV, my wife looked up. She stares out the door, asking me if I heard a sigh. I didn't hear anything. She disregarded it as a possibility. The dog was resting. Suddenly, we both hear the sound of something moving in the kitchen. My wife and I look at each other, and I get out of bed and look in the kitchen and see nothing out of the ordinary. I get back in bed, and about 5 minutes later, I see a black mass shoot from the kitchen to my daughter's room. My daughter was still asleep at that time. I went in there and saw nothing, and my daughter was still asleep. A week later, I saw what looked like a hand moving to close my daughter's door. That scared the hell out of me, but at the exact same time, I always wonder if I have an overreactive imagination. We also have a ton of new EVPs that we have captured, some clear as a bell. Some are guessing what they are saying. And I say the term they loosely. We have been able to hear at least 2 different voices in the audio recordings. A man and a woman, at least from what we think we hear. One day, we were discussing my son, and he had a cold at the time. In the background, you heard a voice saying, "He's sick." They've now mentioned both my name and my daughter's. We have even brought up a relative, and in the background, you hear "Don't tell her." It's known this relative is a skeptic, and maybe they know that? I'm still trying to figure out how all this works. The last part of this is hearsay, and I wish I had proof. Anyone who gets to know me personally knows I am a smart ass and am very uncensored. Well, while doing a recording, I said something backhanded and sarcastic about whoever is here. My wife got concerned and told me my comment might have been too offensive. So later, I went into the kitchen and apologized. I felt awkward doing it. But you know, it's hard to refuse that something isn't here and intelligent when I have actual recordings of them responding. After the apology, I went to bed. 20 minutes later, in an obscure corner of my room, I thought I heard, "You're forgiven." Creeped me the hell out. Never explore an abandoned house. Here's what happened when I tried to. This situation took place when I and my best friend were only 10. We were extremely young, and it explains why we even made the stupid choice to explore an abandoned house. For context, my friend, who we are going to call Tay, was extremely wealthy. Her parents owned a private mansion practically in the middle of nowhere. It was in a very quiet village, and she and one other house were the only houses that actually had people living in them. The rest of the houses lay abandoned. Some houses still looked like they hadn't been finished in building, and some looked like the place had been long after it was destroyed. Well, one of those abandoned houses really caught me and Tay's eye. The house was not too far away, but you couldn't see it from her place. As a kid, I was more of a teller, and she was the one who took action. I told the creepy stories I knew, and she always had a way of making it creepier by doing stuff that would make my stories seem real or just taking actions to test whether what I said was true or not. Once, I was telling a scary story I learned from my Georgian grandmother. Every Eastern European knows Baba Yaga. The awful kid-eating witch that had a house with long chicken legs and scary arms that could take you and feed you to Baba Yaga. When I was young, I believed in this story and shared it with Tay. Both of us were freaked out, but she suggested we go to the abandoned house down the road, since it really reminded her of Baba Yaga's house. Although I liked to tell the stories, I was a big scaredy cat, and it took me a long time before Tay fully convinced me. Little did we know what we would see was way scarier than the old witch tale. So, the next day, without Tay's mom knowing, we went to that awful house. When we arrived, Tay was the first one to go in. At first, we both hesitated, as it's common for individuals, particularly children, to experience fear and reluctance when entering an abandoned house. We mustered up the courage anyway and decided to knock first. From the outside look of this house, there was zero chance someone could live here. The wood the house was built out of looked burnt, the windows at the top and bottom floors looked extremely dirty while some were shattered, and the outside in general was extremely filthy and trashed. It still surprises me to this day how it hadn't been taken down or something. Well, despite that, we knocked on the rusty door multiple times, and when we made sure no one was inside, we opened it. The door was actually open, and when we stepped inside, I couldn't help but gag at the reeking smell. Trash. All that comes to mind is that word. The walls had no wallpaper, and the floors were all concrete. There were 3 turns you could make. You took the right, and there was what looked like an abandoned living room, full of burnt furniture. The only furniture I could clearly make out was what looked like a mattress in the middle of the room and a nightstand with some old books on it. Nothing more, nothing less. The room had no light apart from the shattered window on the front wall. In front was a walkway to a door. The door looked broken, but we didn't explore it further. The most peculiar one was situated on the left. When you walked in, you were greeted by a massive block missing from the floor with some built fences around it. We both looked down the hole and saw it was a sewer. No joke, a sewer. I and Tay exchanged looks of confusion, and I was about to say something when I heard it. Footsteps. Extremely loud ones. It came from the house. I made the run for it. I didn't look at Tay once and ran to the front door we had arrived from. Surprise, surprise, the door was closed. I didn't even scream, nor did I try to test if the door was locked or not. I immediately ran into the right room and through the broken window, running the duck out. I ran and ran until I was far enough from the house that I could see the whole house. I worriedly waited for Tay to run out, and thank goodness I saw her, jumping out the same window, panting. She was already screaming, and I ran toward her to get her hand and run faster. I looked back once and saw what looked like a smiling elderly man. He had something in his hands I hoped wasn't a knife. He was smiling so widely. I still remember his terrifying face and get the chills thinking about it. His clothes were ripped and stained. We ran and ran, passing her house's front entrance and going to the back. We were both terrified. I remember my heart beating faster than ever and being barely able to breathe. The house was no longer visible, but we both were still shaking. We both ended up running in her house and, without a thought, ran to her mom's room. Tay's mom, unaware that we had been outside, was confused by our shaking and worried appearance. "Mom! Mom!" A man chased me with a K-knife, she mumbled and cried out, and I covered my mouth in shock and horror. It was a knife after all. We had to explain the whole thing, but Tay's mom didn't mind us sneaking out as much as she minded the man. She hugged us both and sent me home as soon as possible after calling the police. They ended up moving to a different house, way farther from that area, and they ended up catching the man. Evidently, they sent the man to prison for the murder of several people found in his house. Me and Tay still talk about this incident sometimes, and I can't help but wonder. What would happen if I tried taking a run out the door instead of the window? I heard something while visiting an abandoned farm at night. So, I and my friend made the bright decision to visit the abandoned farm on the outskirts of our small town that we found out about through wandering the town at random a couple of weeks before. We did it while it was nighttime because we thought we might see something cool. So the day comes, and we chill and explore the place a bit. It was actually pretty cool. We decide to wander the path away from the farm that we didn't have the chance to fully explore in our visit in the daytime, and we walk down the path for a good half an hour but eventually decide to turn back because we were getting creeped out and didn't want to come home very late. We started running to get home quicker since we didn't want to spend any more time there and stopped running once we reached the farm, both of us tired by now. We started walking back the small path that was right next to the river. The path is also surrounded by trees, so you can't really see anything in the distance through the thick leaves. The path was leading back into the town, and about halfway through traversing the path, I heard a high-pitched scream and the ringing of bells. Both of us start sprinting, not looking back, and only stop when we are out of the small forest. Both I and my friend heard the sounds, so it couldn't be just me hearing stuff that isn't there. Help, might have accidentally stirred something at abandoned mental hospital. I would like to preface this all by openly stating that I'm generally a philosophical, materialist and skeptic. However, I have recently been considering my life following a particularly strange event that took place at an abandoned insane asylum in my state. I'm not going to disclose the name of the asylum, as it's quite infamous in my state, and it would be easier to track this account back to me based on that information. I and 4 friends decided to visit the abandoned asylum in the summer of 2022. We were a group of bored teenagers, 2 girls, myself included, and 3 guys. The weather was very odd that night. Lightning lit up the sky, the moon was full, and the fog was thick, but there was no rain. The weirdest thing was the multitude of frogs that seemed to have appeared out of nowhere, nearly covering the road as we approached our destination. Perfect weather for us. Anyways, we rolled up to the grounds at around 1 a.m. or so, scaled the fence, and crawled into the patient building. Within 5 minutes, all 3 of the guys, all big guys in their late teens, started complaining, feeling extremely uncomfortable/disturbed. I and the girl, let's call her Zoe, were not fazed and continued on without them. I remember feeling extremely at peace, calm, and almost in a sedative state as we wandered around the building in the dark. I and Zoe exited the building roughly 20 to 30 minutes after the guys. We saw them in the parking lot and gathered to talk about it, and mocked the guys for fleeing. Zoe's boyfriend, who lived in the town the asylum was located in, was adamant that he could communicate with spirits and whatnot. I brushed him off at the time by stating I had been here 1,000 times and hadn't seen or heard shit. This isn't exactly the truth, but that's a long story. We argued back and forth for some time about whether spirits were real or not. At this point, Zoe decided to pull out a surprise for all of us. The surprise was a Ouija board. I'll admit, I was a little intrigued by the thing, as I had never really played with one before. The 5 of us relocated to a pavilion on the grounds, outside of another building, I believed an adolescent residential unit, but I could be wrong, and set up shop. Zoe and her boyfriend started messing with it at first to no avail. They were asking questions for YN answers but were mainly getting gibberish or nothing in return. Although I was impressed with the moving process, I decided it must be some sort of magic trick magnet feature and quickly grew disinterested. I and the other 2 guys walked away and started talking about something else when Zoe asked me to replace her boyfriend at the board. I wasn't sure why, but I assumed it had something to do with the lack of results. I did not believe my presence at the table would change anything for her, and I openly stated as such. Zoe's boyfriend chimed in to inform me that the spirit they had contacted only wanted to speak to girls. I really didn't mind playing around with the board and sat down with Zoe. We started to ask the spirit a YN question, something along the lines of, "Is this person better suited?" And to my amazement the thing actually moved without me touching it. We got a lot of activity on the board. I was certain Zoe was messing with me, but her expression showed she wasn't. She was a really quirky type of girl who couldn't hold back a smile. Her expression was dead serious. I started to ask specific questions. What year were you born? What year did you die? What year did you end up in here? And got numerical answers of years. We asked about its life, if it was happy or not, why they died, etc., and the board was extremely active in responding to this in coherent phrases. Everything went incorrectly when we asked for its name. The board started moving to letters like CRZT and other things I could really decipher into a name. I started to feel alarmed and asked a different question. Are you a boy or a girl? It wouldn't reveal its gender to us. The board went dead and stopped moving around after that. I was absolutely transfixed and somewhat stupefied by the whole experience. It was really odd to me how the thing gave coherent answers. We all packed up and walked back to the car, but something felt off to me. I didn't talk much on the way home. I sat in the middle of the back seat and held my head in my hands. This dark, numbing feeling began to wash over me, and I felt absolutely drained. I felt absolutely devoid of life. Multiple times the guys next to me asked if I was alright, but I brushed them off and said I was just exhausted, as it was nearly 4 a.m. by this point. I came home and almost immediately passed out. I haven't really spoken about this experience to anyone, except for my mother and a few close friends. I had mostly forgotten about this experience in a matter of months. However, this experience marked a major turning point in my life. Things just haven't been the same since. However, the real reason I'm writing this is what happened to me in the time following this experience. My senior year of high school, which followed the summer we participated in this experiment, was a harrowing experience. I started to suffer from chronic pain all over my body. Last year I had made state championships for swimming. This year I was hardly able to get through practice. I got sick all the time, would miss school, and even had panic attacks before races because I was afraid of passing out mid-sprint. I descended into the world of addiction around this time. I had never really done much except smoke before, so this was new. It started with some little things, getting extremely high every weekend with my stoner buddies, drinking until I was blackout drunk at parties a couple of times. It was around this time I started trying out LSD and MDMA on my own, first at mild doses at concerts and then in large quantities alone. The drinking, in particular, got a lot worse after winter break. I began drinking at work, before class, in between class, at home, and before bed. I was spiraling. My mental health was horrible around this time, and the substance abuse made it worse. I struggled to make it to school. I was extremely behind on assignments. I struggled with insomnia and was constantly paranoid that others were watching and judging me. I heard their voices, constantly judging. I was constantly being pestered to apply for college, but I couldn't be bothered. I just descended deeper into my own dark world. I became extremely depressed and had no motivation to do anything or spend time with people. I was once very well socially connected. Every day felt like the one before that, and I was absolutely ducking miserable. I hardly talked to my classmates and would occasionally rant/discuss about geopolitics and political ideology with some of my AP teachers, but that was the extent. I lost passion for everything I once enjoyed. I also started experiencing issues with physical. I went out with a lot of men for seemingly no reason. Sometimes it was multiple men at once. I refused to be in a monogamous relationship and was a very toxic and reclusive person throughout. I lost a lot of my good friends and eventually stopped engaging in intimacy with anyone. I also struggled with extreme anger and disregard for my own safety and that of others. I was extremely cruel to my mother throughout this, something I regret immensely to this day. My behavior was out of control. This all culminated in May of 2023. I received the news that I would not be graduating from high school. I was extremely depressed. Most of my thriving social connections had come to an end. I didn't apply to college. I felt physically sick all the time. I didn't want to go on. I attempted to take my life via odd. Most odds fail. I was institutionalized and medicated. I went to IOP for substance abuse. I managed to barely graduate high school and enrolled in community college. Not going to pour the rest of my life story, but I faced many of the same challenges I did then and many worse things, but I think you get the idea. There could be a myriad of rational explanations for all of these issues. I had suffered some severe trauma in sophomore and junior year, I was abusing drugs, I have hypermobility in the joints, etc. I've really thought about everything that's happened to me since the age of 15. My life had been pretty excellent, and I had not suffered from any mental anguish or physical health issues until that age, where I also witnessed someone else have a physical experience at that same mental institution I mentioned earlier, but that is an even longer story I would rather not get into. It all somehow ties back to this place. I don't know where else to write about this. I'm sorry if it reads like a trauma dump, it's not my intention. I read over some stories earlier of people who descended into dark places after unintentionally or intentionally contacting spirits and whatnot. I have no interest in the occult, demonology, witchcraft, etc., and am not exactly religious. I'm slightly less convinced of my materialist beliefs after reviewing some of the things I've witnessed in my life. I believe I may have made a serious mistake while exploring the old abandoned asylum. Despite years of medications, lifestyle changes, moving towns, and starting over, the same issues follow me everywhere. The same problematic behaviors, depression, paranoia, and disabling pains are ruining my life every time I start it back up. Every time things are going right and I feel okay, I somehow end up holding broken pieces of a life together. I'm trapped in some sort of cycle. If anyone here has any similar experiences, knows someone that has, or knows what to do, please reach out. I'm uncertain if the issues I'm facing are related to this or if I'm merely clinging to hope, but I'm prepared to take any measure to escape this abyss and regain a sense of humanity. Childhood experience. I have never told this story publicly because some days even I don't believe it. I grew up in the middle of nowhere, Alabama. Our trailer was down a long driveway next to a cornfield and a patch of woods. There were 2 other houses on the land, one where my granny lived and an old abandoned house that was falling apart. There were always strange things that happened on the land, noises coming from the woods, strange perfume smells around the abandoned house, and odd movement in the cornfield. But by far the most terrifying experience happened when I was around 12 or 14. It was around 11 at night, and I was walking out of my parents' room. My room was on the other side of the house, so I had to walk through the office, kitchen, and living room to get there. As I was walking through the office, with the kitchen on my left, I heard a voice whisper, "Run." Weird things have happened in the house since I was born, so I was kind of accustomed to it. But when something tells you to run, you run. I jog through the living room, and when I get to my door, I turn around and look in the kitchen. Standing in the middle of the kitchen was something that was clearly not human. It was about 7 feet tall, extremely skinny, with arms that reached almost to the floor, and dark, almost oily skin. Its legs were slightly bent, almost like it was trying to crouch down. I couldn't see any real details, especially in the face. I did notice that it had rather small, beady eyes. We stared at each other for what seemed like forever, and it finally turned its back and started walking to the back door. I hurried to my room and secured it. By morning, it had vanished and everything returned to normal. That was the only time I've ever seen it or anything like it. I am now 30 years old. I have done countless hours of research into mythology, religion, folklore, you name it, and I cannot find anything that remotely resembles what I saw. Don't go down that road. It was a late spring evening in our little town. A group of delinquents had gathered to drink a few beers and discuss what kind of stupidity we were going to commit that evening. This was not a tight-knit group of friends, but rather a collection of individuals who had congregated outside the Dairy Queen. It was almost guaranteed that whatever we were going to do, it would probably involve some kind of laws being broken. Usually nothing worthy of arrest. Usually. Someone piped up and suggested that we go to the academy. Now we had all heard stories about the place, but none of us had actually been there or even believed the stories about it being a gathering place for the occult when the academy closed for the summer. I'm not going to lie, I wasn't feeling this one. There was some disagreement. Some thought it was abandoned, while others insisted this academy was still in use. And as the crowd grew, it seemed like there were too many people jumping in. There were a few people who decided to go that I barely knew. This should have been a significant warning sign. Having too many people, especially those you don't know, usually spells trouble. But what the hell? Let's do this. We're going to get there, nothing is going to happen, and we'll be back in a couple of hours. There were 3 or 4 loads of people in pickup trucks, but my small group would be going in a car. Not the best choice for this kind of trespassing. Along with me was my buddy, Jess. I had known him for a few years. Then there was Alex. I didn't know him all that well. He was a state wrestling champion from another high school. He was a formidable 230-pound wrestler. Then there was Roy. He was a couple of years older than the other 3 of us. Recently, my friend Lee expressed his disapproval of us for relying solely on Roy to purchase our beer. I always assumed Roy had his own life and wouldn't want to hang out with us. Well, unfortunately for him, he decided to that night. We arrived at the entrance of the academy. I expected a locked gate, but it was wide open. My car was loud, so I parked about halfway down the quarter-mile-long entrance road. We walked with another group that arrived by car, while the trucks continued driving in. I was a little surprised by the size of this place. We all ended up on the south side of the property. There was a little house that was a school room. Nothing was locked. We just walked on in. The place looked like it was frozen in time. Like something that hadn't been used in 20 years. This was the only building we entered. Now we may have been doing some illegal stuff, but we had no intention of vandalizing anything. That's another thing about doing this sort of stuff with people you don't really know. You have to keep an eye on them to make sure they understand that we're not there to break things. But so far, everyone was behaving. We walked out and headed up one of the paths toward another building. Another group went another way. Picture a couple of small pickups and others walking with the trucks. I didn't like the idea of them driving in there like that in the first place. Vehicles tend to make way too much noise, but there were some girls who didn't want to walk. As we walked towards the second building, my thoughts were, I've seen enough. Let's go. These idiots in the trucks are going to get us in trouble. I told Roy and Alex we were going. Jess had split off and gone with the other group. As we walked on the path, back towards the main entrance road, I saw one of the trucks flying down towards us. They slide to a stop and tell us we need to go. They saw people through a window of a building on the north end. They were all wearing robes in a candlelit building. And they had been spotted. You know how people act when they are genuinely scared. They sped off, and the second truck came flying by, yelling for us to get out. They didn't even bother to slow down. People in the backs of the trucks were nearly getting bounced out. After a moment of panic about what to do, we started running. But then we heard the voices coming towards us. At that point they were far enough away that you couldn't make out what they were saying. Then I could hear an ATV coming. We were cut off. We were in a wooded area about 400 feet long between 2 paths that merged together on both ends. The others had escaped out of a back way on the south end, but my car was parked off the side of the main entrance. It didn't matter. They were closing in too quickly. We lay down in the woods, not even 15 feet off one of the paths, hoping we could find a way out. I can hear two people walk right past us on the path and see the glow of a dim flashlight. They're not speaking. I don't even know what time it is, but it's probably about 10:30 p.m. on a moonless night. It's dark. So dark that you can't even see the other two lying right beside you. I figured if they went towards the back exit, maybe we had a chance to go towards the car. But then I thought, the cops are probably on their way. Then we hear the dogs. This is bad. Keep in mind, this is a time before cell phones. We are completely cut off unless we can get to the car. But what if they have already spotted the car? We're screwed. As the dogs get closer, I whisper to the others to cover themselves in leaves. The leaves were thick. Plenty thick to hide completely. This is when Alex begins crying. The state wrestling champ. The one that should be most capable of handling himself. I'm telling the guy to just be quiet, but he just keeps whimpering about us going to jail. By then it's pretty clear they're not calling the police. They would have already been there if they had. They intend to deal with us on their own. I asked Alex if he wanted to die, because that's what will probably happen if they find us. We finally get him under control. We just lay, covered in leaves. Did I mention the ants? Minutes turn into an hour. Every time it seems they're gone, you hear them or the dogs again. Other than that, it's near dead silence. All of a sudden I hear a car start and rev up a little. It's my car. I left the keys in it so I wouldn't lose them. They got my car. But then I hear it leaving, not coming towards us. Then I can hear it going through the gears on the highway. WTH? Now I had no idea how we were going to get out. We had no car to get to now. The patrol didn't stop either. Every few minutes, a truck, an ATV, or people walking with the dogs. The dogs got so close once I thought one was going to step right on us. How they didn't find us, I don't know. At what I think was about 2 a.m., I think to myself, if the sun comes up, we're in trouble. The cover of darkness has been the only thing that has saved us. At best we have 3, maybe 3.5 hours to get out of here. But how do you silently get 3 people out? The crunching of leaves alone would alert the dogs at least. Then I don't even know where the hell we really are in relation to the entrance and exit. This place is a lot of acres in a pretty secluded area. It's got to be at least a half mile either way we choose, and these people clearly think there's still someone on the property. A couple more hours roll by. I consider running alone. I know Roy would follow. Alex would get caught. I couldn't do that to him. But I know it won't be long before the sky becomes lighter. A few minutes later, a light rain begins to fall. This is what we need. The rain will mask the sound of the leaves crunching. I whispered to Roy that it was time. He relayed the message to Alex. It felt good to finally stand up after hours. I looked carefully to make sure there was no one close by, at least for that moment. We'd have to walk the path towards the south at least 1,000 feet before there was any more cover. We slowly step out on the path and start walking at a brisk pace. Alex wants to talk. We keep having to tell him to be quiet. About halfway down the path to the next cover, I see headlights. Oh, shh, we hit the deck in the grass beside the path. It's a small car. It turns away from us, then starts backing down the path. I was momentarily confused. As it backed up at a high rate of speed, I recognized the taillights. It was Lee and his Honda CRX. I yelled, "Lee!" He popped the hatch open and yelled back, "Hurry! Get in!" The 3 of us sprinted down that path. I could hear the dogs again, then headlights behind us. 3 full-size adults jumped in the hatch of a CRX, legs hanging out, as Lee sped out the back way. I couldn't believe it. It was so close to dawn. Once we were well clear of the academy, we got out of the car. I'm like, "How did you know? How did you find us?" He explained that he thought he had seen my car driving through town late. He turned around and got the car to stop. It was Jess in my car. The guy had gotten out in the back of a truck, then come back and got my car. I was mad about that for a long time. He knew we hadn't gotten out and just took off in the only way we had out. Of course, if he hadn't, the car might have been discovered. I still couldn't believe he just left us out there, and a chance encounter with Lee was all that saved us. For years this story got told. Every once in a while, even now, it gets brought up in conversation about the good old days. I never wanted to go near the place again, and I don't know anyone who ever did. I don't know who the people were or what they were doing. But it completely fit the stories we had heard about the place. I don't think I've seen Roy or Alex since later that year. Jess died a few years ago. Lee and I became good friends for 15 years or so, despite him moving away. It's been a couple of years now, but every now and then we still get together. This night still comes up, 35 years later. Abandoned building, something came inside with us. So a couple of years back, there's an abandoned oil refinery close to where I live, so it's a pretty big property with a fence running along the highway, and I'm assuming no fence towards the other side, which is mountains and stuff. There's an abandoned office or lab, there was lab equipment inside, building accessible from the street. I've been there a few times, it was cool to explore because it's damn scary inside. Once, I was with two of my friends inside the place. The two long hallways form an L shape. We're in a room in the corner of the L, by the intersect. The wind was blowing some plastic on a window near the top of the L. There's also a door there that is only unlocked from the inside. Suddenly, the noise of the plastic moving doesn't seem to be caused by the wind blowing. Something was moving around the plastic and thrashing it a bit. I whisper, "Lights off." We just wait in darkness, listening intently to the sounds outside. Soon, the noise ceases and reverts to the occasional wind-generated noise, leading us to believe that it was an attempt to reach the door handle from the window or some other source. On the right side of the L, there is a door and a huge broken window somewhat high up on the other side of the wall from that door. We hear something shuffling and climbing that window. I get us to start slowly moving towards the door at the top of the L. It comes inside, and we know because we can hear the thud and then the crunching of the glass on the floor. We keep moving. Then it goddamn growls. I say run out loud but calm a why, and we haul ass to my car and speed out of there. The reason this is so creepy to me is because it doesn't make sense to me. If it was an animal, why try to get in through the plastic-covered window? If it were a person, it would make sense to try to reach the door handle. But when it came in, it growled, and that was no human or crackhead growl, it was an animal, and the window was high up. All I can think of is maybe a mountain lion because this is in California, and rarely, but sometimes, people encounter them. An abandoned farm. If you lived in Canada, you would know there's a lot of country here along with forests. Most of the abandoned buildings are found there. I was 16 when this happened. I grew up mostly in the rougher part of the capital. Yes, even Ottawa has its tough spots, one is known as Vanier. While it's no Detroit, it's still where most of the poor crackheads, along with other addicts, live and stay. I've been through plenty of shit that a lot of people would say is scary, but this is something that still, to this day, at 21 years of age, does not sit well with me. I was with my buddies at an abandoned warehouse. It was pretty deep in the forest, a few little forests are in the city, about 3 if I remember right, drinking and shooting the shit. A big homie brought up some old story of a haunted farm near the spot. He went on about how the person who got him in brought him there to scare the shit out of him. I want to add that when they went, he did confirm that his big homie was the one who was ducking with him when they went, but he still said something was off about it, so we started joking about it. I made a joke that got him really serious. I think I said something along the lines of, "There's a ghost in there." He then looked me in the eyes and told me, "No, something is ducked there." I don't care what the boy did, I felt it. Me being the shit I am, I joked how he was a pussy cat and the only thing you got to fear is ops busting on your shit. He convinced me to go to this haunted barn. I should have learned to shut up right there and then. Next thing I know, we're heading to the barn. We get there, and it's me, my big homie, plus this guy I don't really know, but he is with the group. So it's not weird to have someone with you overnight you don't know. We walk in, the 3 of us. I and the other guy, not the big homie, start loudmouthing, right? Wild shit like, "Hey Casper, what's popping?" And the first spirit that comes out gets bopped on sight. I'm not joking when I say we were halfway in when these heavy ass doors shut on us. Those big ass barn doors, old as shit too, took some effort getting them open in the first place, let alone having them swing like that. We tried to push them open, only to find they were stuck. So we immediately turn to big homie and start grilling him over trying to trip us up over some fake ghost shit while random with me starts turning his flashlight on his phone. I'm asking where our mutual friend is, who I thought was helping him, until I notice my big homie is straight tearing up, which causes me to start freaking out. I mean freaking out, I'm banging on the door and shit, getting homeboy to help while big homie is acting like a damn statue and shit. I get weird feelings on my shoulder. Should I start to freeze up? All I hear from my side is scared, like it was some taunt. I spin around, seeing the same scene from when I start freaking, the guy pushing on the door and big homie staring off into nothing. As I'm asking if anyone heard that, the guy pushing the door starts spazzing, saying some shit in Spanish, I think. I grab him, telling him to calm down while he's giving me this look like he just got shot. I'm sitting there trying to snap him out of his funk. Then big homie starts ramming into the door over and over real hard. I thought he was going to hurt himself. It was dark, I can't tell what exactly was being thrown around, but I can tell you shit was being thrown around. Suddenly, We heard crashes from all directions. I was hit by something, leaving me with scars that remain to this day on the left side of my chin and shoulder. Then the screaming like 3 chicks getting cut up. It was bad. I won't lie, I'm not going to act tougher than I am. I started passing out for the first time, being the most bizarre feeling. My boy grabbed me, and the random, not seeing him, got the door open. We got out, and I threw up while the random said something I didn't catch and took off. Big homie and I looked at each other and started walking back. The entire walk back, he was explaining he had no part in this, swearing up and down. Ranting about how this is impossible and there is no lock on the door, so how was it locked, caused him to freak out more. I went to the doctors to get stitches. I had to say what happened. My dumb ass should have made something up, it could have been ducking anything. When I explained what actually happened, they looked at me as if I was crazy. They turned me into a shrink for a bit due to my outlandish claims. After a bit, they let me off the hook, not thinking I was crazy. All I know is that I was sober that night. Last time I checked, 2 beers don't make you trip out, and a random dude refused to tell us why he was screaming. Now for a bit of comparison. At the age of 15, someone pointed a shotgun at me and pressed it into my stomach, threatening to pull the trigger. But that's simple, I'm about to get my shit blown out. That's that. But that night I could not explain, I could not control nor fight back. That night fills me with a fear that has changed my life and how I see rooms and dark places. I did not know what was happening, how to react, or how to defend. These are the reasons why, to this day, this was one of the most horrifying experiences I've had. Don't get me wrong, getting a gun pointed at me got me on the path I'm on, trying to change my life. But I can't change my fear of walking in the dark around my house or my refusal to enter dark rooms. The cursed town in New Hampshire. Let me begin by saying that, although this story may not be overtly terrifying, it is the most peculiar sequence of events I've ever experienced, and it truly terrified me as I lived through it. Okay, so one day in late summer a few years back, I and my girlfriend at the time were sitting in bed, just scrolling through our phones, with no plans at all for the rest of the day. Then, my phone rings. It's my sister, she's a wonderful person, whom we unfortunately don't see often. She lives about 2 hours northwest of me in New Hampshire on a small plot of land far up a mountain with a goat farm. She asks us if we would like to come up for the day, see her and the goats, and just relax together a little. Feeling lazy and not wanting to drive that far, I almost decline, but she is my sister, and like I said, I don't see her often, so I agree. I and my GF pull ourselves together and get going, and this is when things start getting weird. After 80 minutes of driving, we're almost in her town when we notice our phones are almost dead. We thought we charged them, but we must have forgotten. We have no charger and no stores nearby, so we decide to hurry to my sister's. Remember I said it's a 2-hour drive? Almost 40 whole minutes of it involve winding dirt roads, even some in class 4, that lead up to the top of the mountain she lives on. There is nothing to be found in this area, with houses strewn every few miles, most of which appear uninhabitable, unkempt, and littered with abandoned cars in their front yards. But my sister's house is nice, so we continue on. I can't stop thinking that my phone will die before I get home. We've been on these dirt roads for so long and made so many turns that I don't know where to go if it dies. That's when fear truly struck me. I slam on the brakes, skidding to a stop on the dusty old dirt road, and in front of me is something out of a movie. In the middle of the road, the only road that leads to my sister's house, is a makeshift wall consisting of 2 large metal gates, fallen tree branches, and rocks. It is covered in messages. Signs such as animal sacrifice area and don't cross the fence were present, and hundreds of small newspaper trimmings were arranged to create threatening, cryptic messages. One of these messages effectively stated, "The cult now owns this land, and if you enter, you better have a gun on you, because you'll need it." There were also dozens of pictures of girls, seemingly random ones cut out from books and magazines, but just scattered on the ground at the foot of this wall. We are speechless. We sit in our car for about 10 minutes, staring at the structure and wondering if it's safe to get out and look. But eventually, I do. I look at the wall, all its little messages and warnings, the bullet holes penetrating all the signs, and then I look past the wall, down the road we were intending to travel down, and I freeze. I hear large footsteps off the road into the woods, crunching leaves and snapping sticks. I duck down behind the wall, and I hear whatever this is move onto the road, with dirt and gravel moving now. I peek through a small hole in the metal gates, and what I see has stuck with me since. I, and my girlfriend, swear on our lives, it was the biggest human we had ever seen, and when I say big, I mean tall but also wide. This man was at least 3 times bigger than the second biggest I'd seen, and he was holding an axe. I watch as he turns 90 degrees and faces directly down the road, not towards me but away, and then just stands there, motionless. At this point, feeling mortified, I muster the courage to sprint to my still open car door and reverse out of there. My girlfriend then remarks, "The man in the road never for a second turned around." A few minutes later, after making it a good mile or two away from the area, we pull over to catch our breaths and figure out what is going to happen from here. My sister's road is blocked, we saw some insane man, and our phones are dead. The situation affects both of us. I want to scream, but I keep my composure to avoid frightening my girlfriend. We soon decide the only thing we really can do is drive the other way and attempt to get back to town without directions. There, maybe we can ask someone where the closest store is for chargers. This is the point at which the paranormal begins to manifest itself. After driving for a few more minutes, we pass a few houses before noticing a road on our right. It's called East Washington Road, and the name immediately resonates with me. The last text my sister sent me before my phone died included directions to her house, with a specific warning at the end: "Don't turn onto East Washington, it's confusing." And I don't think it was where we turned before, so we just kept going. After a few more minutes, we come across a road on our left. Could it be that we're on East Washington Road again? I and my GF recognized this weirdness immediately but figured, hey, maybe it just looped across somewhere we missed. Not even a minute later, on the left again, East Washington Road. It is getting creepy now, and after the whole roadblock incident, we are still very on edge and start to feel like something is wrong. We continue straight anyway, and no lie, at least 7 to 8 more times we pass East Washington Road, on both sides of the road we're on, over and over again, until we reach a fork. This fork sent chills down my spine for 2 reasons. First, I know we did not come in through this fork, so we must have missed our turn, a turn onto East Washington no less, but the second part is even more concerning. On both sides of the fork are street signs, as usual, except for the fact that they both say East Washington Road. Could you please explain how the same road forks in 2 different directions? God only knows. So, we turn around and rush back up the road, back towards the scary wall, hoping to see a road we missed that isn't this one repeating East Washington. We made it all the way back to the wall, but unfortunately, there were no other roads. We must have turned onto East Washington at some point by accident, and now it's the only way out. And at this point, we see that we're almost out of gas. We decided to take a chance and drive down the road, through the fork, and along East Washington as far as it goes, hoping it leads back to a main road off this mountain. We drive these winding roads for almost an hour and 40 minutes, gas is very, very close to empty, and it happens. We find the main road, and we immediately follow signs into town. We get to the town center, park, and turn off the car. We intend to go into a small pub to use their phone to call my mom and sister and ask the owner about the closest gas station/store. But things are not back to normal yet. I walk inside the pub alone, my GF stayed in the car. The hostess walks up to me, and before she can speak, I ask, "Can I use the phone here? I'm lost and mine is dead," and I kid you not, without a word or any face of acknowledgement, she just turns around and walks away. So I stand there for a minute and ask the next employee I see, a bartender, and they respond. They guide me over to the back corner of the restaurant, where the phone is, and when I get there, the whole place goes silent. This place is near capacity, totally packed with people, and all of them, at once, go silent. And this silence doesn't feel like, be quiet while he's on the phone to be nice. It's a very uncomfortable silence. But despite this, I call my mom, she picks up, and I explain all that has happened and how we're lost and almost out of gas, and she interrupts and says, "Who is this?" And then it immediately hangs up. "What do you mean? Who is this person?" "Your son, who, at that point, had been talking to you for 5 minutes." I'm quite frustrated at this point, so I leave the pub and hop back in the car. My GF tells me she asked a man on the street about gas stations, and he said there was one right down the road, but it didn't have a store. We knew this town well, and I could drive us home without needing to charge our phones. So we get the gas, fill up, and get on our way. We are currently experiencing a sense of nausea due to the bizarre events that continue to occur. The sun is going down at this point, that perfect level of darkness where detail starts to disappear and depth perception gets a little funny. We're about halfway home when, out of the corner of my eye, I see strange movement on the side of the road. I slow down a little and look over, and I am shocked, it looks like the ground is festering. The dirt, leaves, and other debris in the woods appear to be scuttling around in a massive mosh pit. My GF sees this too, and we both are silent, just like, WTF? At this point in the day, I couldn't pass this completely without an explanation without feeling like I was going insane, So I slowed down my car and turned off the road onto the shoulder with my lights facing into the woods, and what I saw was relieving but also perplexing. The ground wasn't festering around like maggots, it was actually like 20,000 brown chickens. Just in someone's yard and back forest area. Why? I'm not sure why, but I've never seen so many chickens in my life before. Without even saying a word, I pull back onto the road, and we keep heading home. We make it back to our hometown. However, the misfortune that befell us that day required an additional layer of hardship. We're driving through a big open field, one we know very well, and we see nearly 10 cars pulled off the road, some even into the field. This is not normal at all. Then we see the car heading in our direction on the road, slamming on their brakes, and immediately all the people inside jump out. Once again, the situation is clearly out of the ordinary. Then they all point up at the sky and stand there with their hands up. I don't know if this sounds crazy to you, but seeing anything else odd that day was heartbreaking to me. I and my girlfriend looked up in the sky, and what we saw we couldn't explain, a huge glowing orange-red ball. It was twice the sun's size, so dim you could look at it, and it seemed to move. We sped home, ignoring the paranormal stuff. Upon arriving home, we get some major relief but also some more unanswered questions. The giant ball in the sky was, in fact, the sun. A once-in-a-lifetime solar event combined with a large amount of wildfire smoke in the atmosphere made it look very strange. At least it wasn't frightening anymore. On the other hand, though, after calling my sister, she said she had no idea what I was talking about, explaining the wall blocking the road or the East Washington that had us lost for hours, saying she'd never seen it. And even worse, my mom swears to this day that not only did I not call her that night from the pub, but she got no calls at all. My girlfriend and I were terrified of everything that happened that day, and we told all of our friends about it. However, the reactions were mixed, with most thinking we were lying. This is one of 3 insane events that have taken place in this town. The other involved me and all my guy friends going back up to the wall because they wanted to see it after hearing my story, and just as much scary, unexplainable stuff happened that day as well. This entirely solidified the fact in my head that this town is haunted.